Throwaway, because no way in hell do I want to be linked to this. I think my earliest memory was in kindergarten, when I imagined what it would be like to get eaten by my teacher, and feeling really weird because of it. After that, it only got more solidified by shit like the beginning scene of Men in Black 2, or various scenes in different cartoons. And now, here I am, a young adult who gets sexually aroused by the idea of being swallowed by hot women. What the fuck? The thing that's starting to get to me is like some of the things that gets me hard are like on a psychopathic level. People being treated like their lives don't matter is a common trope, and it makes my heart burn with anger and disgust. But lo and behold, also make me rock hard. It's just like, why did it have to be me? Why couldn't I just be turned on by something normal? It's also getting to me that it feels like I'm keeping a secret from my girlfriend. We've been dating for about 2 years now, and while she knows I find stomachs attractive, luckily, it doesn't have to be vor-related for that. I just like bigger women in general. She has no idea that I have this fetish, and I feel like I'm deceiving her for letting her think I'm a normal human. Part of me wants to tell her and hopes I can move past this, but like, how could she possibly understand, let alone accept, why I'm like this? Man, I'm just kind of worn out by this. TLDR, I'm aroused by vor, and I feel like a Every year, our school hosted a talent show, and every year, it was the same thing. Some kid singing a bad cover of a Taylor Swift song, a handful of awkward guitar solos, and the occasional cringeworthy attempt at stand-up comedy. Nobody really wanted to participate, but the teachers hyped it up as a great way to build community. Translation, it was mandatory for extra credit in some classes. So there we were, me, Jake, and Dave, sitting at lunch, trying to figure out how we could get through this disaster without actually embarrassing ourselves. Jenny, the class president, and our only connection to anything resembling sanity, suggested we perform something simple and non-controversial, like a song. But Jake doesn't do simple. He leaned back in his chair, popped open a soda, and with that familiar gleam in his eye, said, "Nah, we're gonna do something epic. We're gonna put on a rock opera." We all groaned in unison. "Jake, what the hell are you talking about?" "Trust me," he said, grinning like a madman. "We'll dress up, we'll go big, we'll blow everyone's minds. They won't know what hit them." Dave looked skeptical. "You can't even play an instrument." "Doesn't matter," Jake replied. "It's all about the show." And just like that, we were in. Over the next week, Jake somehow convinced us to help him throw together the most unhinged performance our school had ever seen. We spent every afternoon after school in Brian's garage. Yes, Van Brian, naturally, putting together makeshift costumes and practicing choreography that could generously be described as creative. The theme? Space Vikings. We wore aluminum foil helmets, borrowed toy swords from Dave's little brother, and taped glow sticks to our clothes. Jake insisted on wearing a cheap Darth Vader cape he found at a thrift store, which made no sense, but looked awesome. The plot of our rock opera was, well, it didn't exactly make sense either. The basic idea was that we were intergalactic warriors from a distant galaxy, sent to Earth to battle a giant space dragon, portrayed by Jenny, reluctantly, wearing a cardboard mask and flapping her arms like wings. The performance ended with us staging a sword fight in the middle of a laser show. There were no actual lasers, of course, just flashlights with colored cellophane taped over them. But in Jake's head, it was going to look totally professional. The night of the talent show arrived, and backstage, you could feel the tension. Kids were practicing their songs and monologues. A couple of nervous freshmen were warming up for a terrible dance routine. Jake was in his element. "Tonight," he whispered, adjusting his Viking helmet in the mirror, "we become legends." Our turn came up about halfway through the show, right after a kid butchered Wonderwall on an out-of-tune guitar. We marched onto the stage with full confidence, toy swords in hand, looking like cosplayers who got lost on their way to a Comic-Con. The crowd was already laughing, but Jake soaked it all in, grinning ear to ear. The lights dimmed. Our backing track, a chaotic mix of synth beats and distorted guitar riffs that Jake found on the internet, blasted through the speakers. And then it began. We opened with Jake shouting, "We are the Vikings of Nebula Prime," before launching into what can only be described as a series of offbeat, half-screamed lyrics about conquering planets and defeating evil space serpents. None of it rhymed. Most of it was just gibberish. but we went all in. Halfway through, Dave tripped over his own sword and crashed into a microphone stand, which knocked over the prop dragon mask Jenny was wearing. She muttered a curse under her breath and just kept flapping her cardboard wings, because the show must go on. Then came the sword fight. Jake and I grabbed our toy swords and staged the most over-the-top duel you could imagine, complete with slow-motion dodges and spinning moves we definitely didn't rehearse. At one point, Jake tried to leap over a folding chair, but got tangled in his cape and face-planted on the stage. The crowd howled with laughter. Jake scrambled to his feet, unbothered, and yelled, "The battle is not over," before swinging his sword wildly. He accidentally smacked the drama teacher's podium, which toppled off the edge of the stage and shattered into 3 pieces. That's when things really went off the rails. Somehow, Dave got too into character and launched himself off the stage, crashing into the front row of seats. Jenny gave up entirely and threw her dragon mask into the crowd, where it hit one of the vice principals in the face. And Brian, who was supposed to be manning the flashlights backstage, hit the wrong switch and accidentally turned on the overhead sprinkler system. Yes, the sprinklers. Water rained down on us mid-performance, soaking the stage, the audience, and all our costumes. The cardboard props disintegrated on the spot. Kids were screaming and slipping all over the gym floor. Somewhere in the chaos, Jake picked up his sword and screamed, "This is what victory feels like." At that moment, the principal burst into the gym, looking like he had just aged 10 years. Mr. Haggerty, with water dripping from his bald head, stomped through the chaos and yelled, "What the hell is this?" Without missing a beat, Jake pointed his sword dramatically and shouted, "The Space Vikings have conquered Earth." That was the last straw. Mr. Haggerty pulled the plug on the sound system, ending the show mid-song, and ordered everyone out of the gym. We were escorted off stage, still in costume, while the rest of the talent show was canceled on the spot. The fallout was spectacular. We were banned from participating in any future talent shows, forever. The drama teacher looked like she was going to cry when she saw what was left of her podium. And the janitors were furious about having to mop up the sprinkler mess for hours. Jake, of course, was thrilled. "Did you see their faces?" he said, grinning ear to ear as we stood outside, still soaked from the sprinklers. "We blew their minds. We got detention for a week, but honestly, it was worth it." To this day, people still talk about the Space Viking incident. The seniors loved it. Even the freshmen, who normally hated everything, said it was the best thing they'd ever seen. And every time someone mentions it, Jake just smiles and says, "They banned us because we were too good." And honestly, he might be right. I almost canceled when I saw the job details. The text said, "Client prefers no talking. Just keep him company for a few hours." Something about the no talking part gave me a weird feeling, like maybe I'd walk into a room and find someone in the middle of a crisis, or worse, a breakdown. But the job came with a hefty payout, and I really needed it. So I said yes, told myself it'd be fine, and showed up at his apartment right on time. It was one of those high-rise buildings with glass walls and a doorman who didn't even pretend to make eye contact. I took the elevator to the 18th floor and spent the whole ride practicing how to make myself invisible. If the guy didn't want conversation, I figured the least I could do was be as unintrusive as possible. Easy, right? Just sit there, shut up, and collect the money. I knocked twice. The door opened a crack, and a man peeked out, mid-40s tall, with dark hair that looked like it hadn't seen a brush in days. His eyes were tired, but not in a way that came from lack of sleep. It was the kind of tired that settles in your bones and makes everything feel heavier. "You're Jade?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. "That's me," I said, offering a small smile. He nodded and stepped aside. "Come in." I slipped inside and got my first look at the place. It was spotless, almost too spotless, like everything had been carefully arranged to avoid giving away too much. No clutter, no personal touches. Just a couch, a coffee table, and a view of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows that made the whole room feel like it was floating in the sky. "Make yourself comfortable," he muttered, already heading toward the couch. He sat down without another word, sinking into the cushions like the weight of the day had finally caught up to him. I stood awkwardly for a moment, trying to figure out what comfortable looked like in this situation. Eventually, I decided to sit at the other end of the couch, leaving enough space between us that it didn't feel too personal. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional honk of a car far below. I kept sneaking glances at him, waiting for some kind of cue, anything to let me know what he wanted from this. But he just stared out the window, lost in thought. So I waited. For the first 20 minutes, the silence felt heavy, like I was intruding on something private. But after a while, it started to feel peaceful. There was something oddly soothing about sitting in a room with someone and not having to fill the silence with words. It reminded me of the rare moments when life slows down enough to let you breathe. He shifted slightly, pulling a blanket off the back of the couch and draping it over his lap. Then, to my surprise, he held out one side of it toward me. I hesitated for a second, but his expression didn't change. He wasn't asking for anything complicated, just offering me a piece of warmth. So, I scooted closer and pulled the edge of the blanket over my legs, feeling the soft weight of it settle between us. We sat like that for a while, sharing the blanket, the silence, and the view of the city glowing far below us. It wasn't what I'd expected, but somehow it felt nice. At some point, he reached for the remote on the coffee table and flicked on the TV. A soft piano melody filled the room as an old black and white movie flickered to life on the screen. I recognized it immediately. Casablanca. I couldn't help but smile. "This is a good one," I whispered, even though I knew he didn't want to talk. To my surprise, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. We watched in silence, the soft glow of the TV casting flickering shadows across the room. I stole a glance at him now and then, and each time, he seemed a little more relaxed, his shoulders less tense, his breathing slower. It was like the weight he'd been carrying was finally starting to ease, if only just a little. When the movie reached the iconic airport scene, "Here's looking at you, kid," I noticed him blink rapidly, like he was holding back tears. He didn't say anything, didn't move, but I could feel the sadness radiating off him in waves. Without really thinking about it, I reached over and gently placed my hand on his. It was a small gesture, nothing more than a light touch, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he gave my hand the slightest squeeze, as if to say, "Thank you." We stayed like that for the rest of the movie, silent, still connected in a way that didn't need words. When the credits rolled, he turned off the TV and let out a long, slow breath. The kind of breath people take when they've been holding something inside for too long. "Thank you," he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "You're welcome," I whispered back, giving his hand one last squeeze before letting go. He stood up slowly, as if moving through water, and walked over to the window. For a moment, he just stood there, staring out at the city below, lost in his own thoughts. Then he turned back to me, a faint, tired smile on his lips. "I didn't know if this would help," he said softly. "But it did. So, thank you." I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything more. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to me with a look that was equal parts gratitude and apology. "For your time." I took the envelope and tucked it into my jacket. "Take care of yourself, okay?" I said gently. He gave me a small nod. "You too, Jade." As I left the apartment, the night air felt cool against my skin, and the city buzzed quietly around me. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the night sink in. The job hadn't gone the way I'd imagined, but somehow it had been exactly what both of us needed. A little silence, a little company, and the quiet reassurance that sometimes just being there is enough. And as I walked home, I realized something that surprised me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. And that was enough. When I was a kid, my family lived in a small, one-story house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It was a cozy place, nothing fancy, with a big backyard and a couple of old oak trees that creaked whenever the wind blew. My bedroom was at the very back of the house, with a window that faced the yard. That window was both my favorite thing and my least favorite thing about the room. I like watching the sun set through it, but at night it always made me uneasy. I never told anyone, but from the time we moved in, I had this weird, creeping feeling whenever I looked out that window at night. I always felt like something was out there, watching, waiting. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But that feeling never went away. One night, when I was about 8 years old, I woke up for no reason around 2 in the morning. The house was completely silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I lay there for a minute, trying to convince myself to go back to sleep, when I heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from my window. It wasn't loud, just a faint tap, tap, tap on the glass, like someone gently knocking with their fingernails. My heart started racing. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and held my breath, praying the noise would stop. But it didn't. It came again. Tap, tap, tap. I told myself it had to be the wind, or maybe a branch brushing against the glass. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It was too deliberate, too patient. Finally, I gathered the courage to peek out from under the blanket. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a dim glow across my room. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window, and that's when I saw him. There was a man standing just outside my window, his face pressed against the glass. He was pale, with dark, sunken eyes, and his lips were stretched into a wide, crooked smile, as if he was enjoying some private joke. His breath fogged up the glass, and his eyes, those cold, lifeless eyes, were staring directly at me. I froze, every muscle in my body locked with terror. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. All I could do was lie there, paralyzed, as he continued to tap on the glass with one long, bony finger. Tap, tap, tap. Then, very slowly, he raised his other hand and gave a small wave. I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out from fear, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through the window, and everything seemed normal again. I ran to my parents' room, babbling about the man at the window, but they didn't believe me. They said it was just a bad dream, nothing more. But I knew it wasn't. A few weeks passed without incident, and I started to convince myself that maybe they were right. Maybe it really had been a nightmare. But then one night it happened again. I woke up around the same time, 2 a.m., and there he was. The same man. The same wide, crooked smile. This time, he wasn't just standing outside the window. He was tapping on the glass again, but harder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. I shut my eyes tight, hoping he would go away. But instead of leaving, he leaned in closer, his breath fogging up the glass. Through the mist, he wrote something with his finger. 2 words. Come out. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was lie there, heart pounding, as he smiled that awful smile and waited. I don't know how long I stayed like that, minutes, maybe hours, but eventually the tapping stopped. When I opened my eyes again, he was gone. The next morning I told my parents everything. They still didn't believe me. My dad even went outside to check the yard, but found nothing. No footprints, no marks on the window, nothing to prove someone had been there. That was the last time I slept in that room. I refused to go back in, no matter what my parents said. They thought I was being ridiculous, but I didn't care. I knew what I had seen. We moved out of that house a few months later. I was relieved to leave, hoping I'd never have to think about that night again. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hear a soft tap, tap, tap on my apartment window. And every time, I tell myself it's just the wind. I don't look, because I know if I do, he'll be there. And this time, he won't just be smiling. It wasn't the first time I'd noticed the drawer was locked. It had been bothering me for months. One of those small, nagging things you tell yourself doesn't mean anything, but you can't quite let it go. It was the bottom drawer in Ryan's desk, the one he never opened when I was around. I hadn't thought much of it at first. We'd lived together for over a year, and everyone has their private things, right? But slowly, little things started piling up. Ryan had grown distant. Not in an obvious way, but in the way where you feel someone slipping through your fingers, one silent evening at a time. He was always too tired to talk, always busy when I wanted to spend time together. His phone, once carelessly left on the counter, now lived in his pocket, always on silent. In that drawer, I couldn't get it out of my head. I never wanted to be the person who snooped, but the fact that he kept it locked, without ever telling me why, felt like a secret between us, one I wasn't part of. One day, I asked him about it, half joking. What's in the bottom drawer? Your secret stash of candy? Or something? His reaction was subtle, but it was there. A flicker of something, guilt, maybe? Or panic. It was gone in an instant, replaced by an easy grin. Just some old work stuff. Nothing interesting. But I knew Ryan well enough to know when he was lying. The drawer became an obsession. Every time I walked past his desk, my eyes would drift toward it. I tried to tell myself it was silly, that I was reading too much into a locked drawer. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. One night, Ryan came home late, smelling faintly of cologne I didn't recognize. He kissed me on the cheek, mumbled something about a long day, and went straight to bed. I stayed awake, lying there next to him, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't stop thinking about the drawer. And that's when I decided I needed to know the truth. The next day, Ryan left early for work. I waited until I heard the front door click shut, then slid out of bed and made my way to his desk. My heart pounded in my chest as I knelt in front of the drawer, my fingers trembling slightly. It was locked, of course, but Ryan wasn't exactly the most careful person. I'd seen him unlock it once, using a small silver key attached to his car keys. I hesitated for a moment, my conscience nagging at me. This felt wrong. I knew that. But the doubt, the distance between us, was eating me alive. I needed to know what he was hiding. So I grabbed his spare car keys from the bowl by the door and slid the key into the lock. It clicked open with a soft, satisfying sound. The drawer was filled with papers at first, boring stuff. Old bills, receipts, things that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. But beneath the clutter was a small black box. My stomach twisted as I reached for it, half hoping it was something harmless, like an old watch or keepsakes from before we met. But it wasn't harmless. Inside the box were photos. Dozens of them. Photos of Ryan and another woman. They were everywhere. Laughing at a beach, posing together in restaurants, curled up on a couch that wasn't ours. Some of the pictures were recent. I recognized the haircut he'd gotten just last month. I felt my throat tighten, my hands trembling as I flipped through the photos. It wasn't just the pictures, though. There were handwritten notes, too. Little love letters folded neatly at the bottom of the box. Miss you already. Can't wait until we're together again. And the worst part? One of the notes mentioned my name. She has no idea. I feel bad lying to her, but we'll figure it out soon. The words burned into my brain like a brand. I sat there, numb, clutching the photos and notes in my hands. I could hear the clock ticking softly on the wall, every second dragging me deeper into the realization that my relationship, my life, was a lie. How long had this been going on? How many times had he kissed me goodnight while thinking about her? I wanted to scream, to throw the box across the room, to break every picture in half. But instead, I sat on the floor, quietly breaking apart on the inside. When the numbness wore off, the anger set in. I knew I couldn't confront him right away, not while I was still this raw. I needed to process what I'd found. I needed a plan. So I closed the drawer, locked it, and put the key back exactly where I'd found it. I even made the bed, straightened the pillows, and wiped away the tears that had streaked down my face. I didn't want him to know I knew. Not yet, because I was done being the fool. When Ryan came home that evening, everything was exactly as it had been. I greeted him with a smile that felt like a mask, watched as he kissed my forehead like nothing had changed. And maybe for him, nothing had, but for me, everything was different. I waited until he fell asleep that night before I grabbed my bag and packed what I needed. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a fight or the chance to twist the truth into something else. I left a note on the kitchen counter, just a few words, simple and final. You were right. I had no idea, but now I do. I placed the note on top of the black box, the pictures and letters inside. Then I slipped out the door, quietly and without looking back. The first night alone was hard. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, parked in a friend's driveway, wondering how I hadn't seen this coming. But with every passing hour, the weight on my chest began to lift. By morning, I knew I'd made the right decision. Ryan tried calling me the next day, and the next, but I never answered. There was nothing left to say. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild my life. Slowly, piece by piece, I found myself again. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness felt like it might swallow me whole. But each morning, I woke up a little stronger. One day, I drove past our old apartment. I thought about the locked drawer, the black box, the lies hidden inside. And for the first time, I felt nothing, because I was finally free. If there's one piece of advice I can offer you, it's this. Never hook up with someone at a bachelor party, especially if that someone is the bride's sister. Trust me, it's not worth it. It started out like any other bachelor weekend. My friend Mike was getting married, and a bunch of us rented a cabin out by the lake for one final guy's trip before he tied the knot. I'd known Mike since high school, and I'd never seen him so excited. He and his fiancée, Lindsay, were that annoyingly perfect couple, always posting cute pictures and finishing each other's sentences. Everyone knew they were going to make it. There wasn't a doubt in anyone's mind. The plan for the weekend was simple: beer, boats, bonfires, and no drama. What could possibly go wrong? Well, everything. Underscore. Lindsay's younger sister, Haley, was the wild card. She wasn't supposed to be at the bachelor weekend. After all, it was guys only, but she showed up anyway. Apparently, she had been staying at the family's lake house nearby and decided to drop by to hang out with us for a bit. Now, I'd met Haley a few times at parties and group dinners over the years. She was younger than Lindsay by a couple of years, the artsy, free-spirited type who never quite fit in with the rest of Lindsay's polished, well-put-together friends. She had tattoos, messy hair, and that kind of energy that made you feel like she could convince you to jump off a cliff just to see what would happen. The second she walked into the cabin, I knew I was in trouble. She had this sly smile, like she was already plotting something, and every time I made eye contact with her, it felt like I was being pulled into a game I didn't know the rules to. The smart thing to do would have been to keep my distance, but I've never been known for making smart decisions. That first night, we were all drinking by the bonfire, swapping stories about Mike, and taking turns embarrassing him with old high school memories. Haley made herself right at home, sitting on a cooler and tossing out sarcastic comments every chance she got. She fit in way too easily, which should have been my second red flag. At some point, she caught my eye across the fire and gave me this look. Half smile, half dare. I tried to ignore it, but the beer was kicking in, and my brain wasn't exactly firing on all cylinders. After a few hours, people started trickling off to bed, leaving just me, Haley, and a couple of other guys lingering by the dying fire. Haley stood up, stretched, and gave me that same mischievous smile. "You coming inside? Or are you going to sit out here all night?" I should have said no. I should have stayed by the fire, let her walk away, and saved myself from what came next. But instead, like an idiot, I followed her inside. We ended up in the kitchen, sitting on the counter and sharing the last of the beer. The conversation was easy, too easy. She talked about how everyone always compared her to Lindsay, how she hated being treated like the irresponsible little sister, and how she felt like she was always standing in her sister's shadow. I nodded along, listening, pretending that I wasn't noticing how close she was sitting, how her knee kept brushing against mine, how her smile lingered a little too long every time I made her laugh. "You're not like the others," she said suddenly, tilting her head as she looked at me. "You don't treat me like a kid." There was a weight to her words, like she was testing the waters. I knew I should have laughed it off, changed the subject, done anything to steer the conversation back to safer territory. But instead, I said something stupid like, "That's because you're not a kid." The second the words left my mouth, I knew I was done for. She leaned in slow, deliberate, and kissed me. And instead of stopping it, I kissed her back. What happened next was a blur of bad decisions. We stumbled down the hall, barely making it into one of the guest rooms before things got out of hand. Every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to stop, but logic didn't stand a chance against the alcohol and adrenaline pumping through my veins. It was reckless, it was stupid, and it was over way too fast. The second it ended, reality came crashing down like a tidal wave. We lay there in the dark, tangled in sheets that weren't ours, the silence between us thick with regret. "I probably shouldn't have done that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yeah," I muttered. "Me neither." We both knew this was a disaster waiting to happen. The next morning was pure panic. I woke up to the sound of guys moving around the cabin, getting ready for a day out on the lake. I scrambled to get dressed while Haley slept soundly beside me, looking far too peaceful for someone who had just blown up her sister's wedding weekend. I managed to sneak out of the room without anyone noticing and made my way outside, hoping that I could act like nothing had happened. But as soon as I stepped onto the porch, Mike gave me a knowing grin. "Late night?" he asked, elbowing me in the ribs. I forced a laugh, trying to play it off. Something like that. He didn't push it, thank God, but I spent the rest of the day on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Every time Haley looked at me, I felt like I was standing on a minefield, just waiting for it to explode. The real fallout came later that night. We were sitting around the fire again when Lindsay showed up at the cabin. She was supposed to come the next morning, but apparently, she decided to surprise everyone. The second she walked in, Haley tensed beside me, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was about to go horribly wrong. Lindsay greeted everyone, smiling and hugging Mike, but when she saw me sitting next to Haley, her smile faltered. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice light but laced with suspicion. "Nothing," I said quickly, too quickly. Haley, on the other hand, just gave her sister a lazy smile. "Relax, Linz. We were just hanging out." Lindsay's eyes narrowed. "Hanging out?" There was a long, heavy silence, and for a moment I thought Haley was going to spill everything right there in front of everyone. But instead, she just shrugged and stood up. "Whatever," she said, walking away like nothing had happened. Lindsay stared after her for a moment, then turned back to me, suspicion still written all over her face. "If you did something stupid," she whispered, "I swear to God, I'll kill you." And with that, she walked away, leaving me sitting by the fire, heart pounding, knowing that I had just narrowly escaped total disaster. But only for now. To this day, I don't know if Lindsay ever found out what happened between me and Haley. I haven't spoken to either of them since the wedding, and part of me hopes I never do. Some mistakes are better left buried. And this was one. Most people assume that when someone quits drinking, it's because something bad happened. A DUI, a fight, or a rock-bottom moment that scared them sober. But that's not how it went for me. There was no dramatic breakdown, no intervention. No one even knew I was struggling because I was great at hiding it. The truth is, I quit drinking because of a dream. One dream, so vivid, so real, it completely rearranged the way I saw my life. Back then, I was drinking way more than anyone realized. I wasn't the kind of drunk who gets sloppy at parties or blackouts in public. No, I was sneaky about it. I'd have 2 drinks in front of friends, just enough to seem fun, and then sneak home to drink the rest alone. A bottle of vodka in the freezer, cans of beer hidden under my sink, whiskey tucked behind the cereal. It was a quiet routine, the kind you build slowly until it becomes normal. The worst part was, I didn't even think I had a problem. My life was still in order, at least on the surface. I held down a decent job, paid my bills, kept my relationships intact. I told myself that drinking was just a way to cope with stress, something I deserved after a long day. But the truth? I was drowning. I just didn't realize how deep I'd gone until that dream. It was Mother's Day, 2018. I'd spent the afternoon drinking alone on my couch, scrolling through social media and feeling guilty for not calling my mom. Somewhere between my 3rd and 4th drink, I passed out. And that's when it happened. The dream. In the dream, I was holding a baby. Not just holding her. She was mine, my daughter. I can still see her so clearly. Even now, she had soft, chubby little cheeks and wide brown eyes that sparkled every time she looked up at me. I remember how warm and heavy she felt in my arms, the way she fit perfectly against my chest like she belonged there. And the love. God, the love was overwhelming. It wasn't just a nice feeling, it was all-consuming. It was the kind of love that makes you want to protect someone with every fiber of your being, the kind of love that makes the whole world seem brighter and bigger just because they exist in it. I remember looking down at her, thinking, this is everything I've ever wanted. But then the dream shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't holding her anymore. I was watching her from a distance, like I was trapped behind a glass wall. I could see her crying, reaching for me, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get to her. Something was pulling me back, dragging me away, and the further I got, the louder her cries became. And then, just before I woke up, I heard this voice, soft but firm, whisper, "If you keep drinking, you'll never meet her." I shot awake, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the fridge, and the bottle of vodka I'd been nursing sat half empty on the coffee table. I stared at it, my head spinning, and that whisper echoed in my mind over and over. You'll never meet her. I don't know how to explain it, but in that moment, everything shifted. It wasn't even a choice. I just knew that if I didn't stop drinking, I'd never have the life I saw in that dream. I'd never meet the baby girl who felt more real to me than anything I'd ever experienced. I'd lose her before she even existed. So I quit. Cold turkey right then and there. I poured the vodka down the sink, threw out the beer, and packed the whiskey bottles into a garbage bag. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't make a big announcement or post about it online. I just stopped. At first, no one noticed. My friends still invited me out for drinks, and I'd go, pretending everything was normal. Just water for me, I'd say, and they'd shrug it off, assuming it was a phase. They didn't know that every time I said no to a drink, I was thinking about that dream, about the baby girl I might never meet if I gave in. The early days were hard. I didn't have withdrawal symptoms, but the silence was suffocating. Drinking had been my way of filling the empty spaces, of dulling the sharp edges of life. Without it, everything felt raw and exposed. I'd come home from work, sit on the couch, and stare at the empty space where the bottle used to be, wondering if I'd made a mistake. But every time I thought about giving up, I'd picture her, those big brown eyes, that tiny, trusting smile, and it would pull me back. You'll never meet her, the voice would whisper. Not if you go back. Months passed, and life slowly started to shift. I found other ways to cope. Reading, running, journaling. I rebuilt my life, one sober day at a time, until the idea of drinking became a distant, hazy memory. My friends started noticing the change. You look good, they'd say. Happier, even. And I was. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving towards something real. But the strangest part was I never told anyone why I quit. Not my friends, not my family, no one. It felt too personal, too strange to explain. How do you tell people that a dream convinced you to stop drinking? That you gave up booze because of a baby who doesn't even exist yet? It sounds ridiculous, like some weird, sentimental nonsense. But to me, it wasn't nonsense. It was everything. Even now, years later, I still think about her sometimes. I still wonder if she's out there, waiting for me to get my life together. I don't know if I'll ever have kids. Life is complicated and nothing is guaranteed. But the dream gave me something I didn't know I needed. It gave me hope. It gave me a reason to believe that I could be more than the person I was. And that's why I quit drinking. Not because of a rock-bottom moment or some tragic mistake, but because, for the first time in a long time, I saw a future worth fighting for. A future where I was someone's everything. And whether or not that dream ever comes true, it was enough to change my life. And that, I think, is all that really matters. When I was 12, my family rented a cabin by a lake for the summer. It was one of those rustic places with no Wi-Fi, no TV, and spotty phone service. My parents called it a tech detox, but to me it felt more like a prison sentence. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to stretch on forever. The only neighbors were a few scattered cabins along the other side of the lake, barely visible through the trees. The first few days were uneventful. I spent most of my time reading old paperbacks I'd found on the cabin's dusty bookshelf or skipping stones along the shore. The lake was quiet, too quiet. There were no birds, no frogs, not even the usual buzz of insects. Just the occasional ripple on the surface of the water, as if something had disturbed it from beneath. The weirdness started around the third night. I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of footsteps outside my window. Soft, deliberate steps, crunching on the dry leaves just beyond the wall. I froze, holding my breath, heart hammering in my chest. My bed was right under the window, so I was too afraid to even sit up and look. I kept waiting for the sound to go away, but it didn't. Whoever or whatever it was, it just stood there. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. That awful sensation of being watched crept over me, making every hair on my body stand on end. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The next morning, I told my parents, hoping they'd take me seriously. But they just laughed it off. saying it was probably a deer or some other animal wandering through the woods. "We're in nature, kiddo," my dad said, ruffling my hair. "There's going to be noises." That day, I tried to shake off the fear. I explored the edge of the woods, wandered up and down the shore, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods felt off, like they were hiding something just out of sight. That night it came back. The footsteps were louder this time, circling the cabin slowly, deliberately. I lay in bed, paralyzed with fear, staring at the ceiling and hoping it would go away. I kept waiting for my parents to wake up and check the noise, but they didn't stir. The footsteps stopped right outside my window again, and then something tapped against the glass. It wasn't loud, just a soft tap, 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 like a fingernail brushing the window. My heart raced, and I clamped my hands over my mouth to stop myself from screaming. I knew if I looked, I'd see something staring back at me from the darkness. I stayed that way for what felt like hours, every muscle in my body locked with terror, until exhaustion finally pulled me back to sleep. The next morning, I checked the ground outside the window, expecting to see footprints in the dirt. But there was nothing. No disturbed leaves, no sign that anything or anyone had been there. That's when I knew it wasn't an animal. The following night, I kept a flashlight under my pillow. If it came back, I told myself I'd shine the light on it and see what it was. I don't know what I thought that would accomplish. Maybe if I saw it, it would stop being scary. Maybe it would just turn out to be some kid playing a prank. But what I saw wasn't a kid. It came back around 2 a.m., the footsteps slow and deliberate, circling the cabin just like before. I lay perfectly still, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles ached. The footsteps stopped outside my window, and then the tapping started again, tap, tap, tap. I counted to 3 in my head, then rolled over and flicked on the flashlight, aiming it right at the window. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. There was a face staring at me through the glass. But it wasn't human. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched too tight over its skull. The eyes were black, round, and far too large for its face, with no whites, just endless, glossy darkness. It had no nose, just 2 small slits, and its mouth was a thin, lipless line that stretched into a grin far too wide for comfort. It pressed its hand against the glass, a long, spindly thing with fingers that ended in sharp points. It leaned closer, its black eyes glittering with what I can only describe as curiosity. And then it smiled. The grin stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, needle-thin teeth. It tapped its claw-like fingers against the glass again. Tap, 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 as if to say, "I see you." I don't know how long I stared at it, too terrified to move, too afraid to even blink. Eventually, it tilted its head, as if disappointed, and slowly backed away into the darkness of the woods. I lay awake for the rest of the night, flashlight clutched in my hands, too scared to move. In the morning, I told my parents everything, but they didn't believe me. They said it was just a nightmare, the product of an overactive imagination. That day, I refused to go outside. I stayed inside the cabin, watching the woods from the window, waiting for it to come back. But it didn't. Not during the day, at least. We left the cabin a few days later, and I tried to convince myself it had all been a bad dream. But every now and then, I'll catch a glimpse of movement at the edge of my vision, just a flash of pale skin or the glint of black eyes, and my heart will race all over again. I haven't gone camping since, and sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows seem too deep, I swear I can hear it. Tap, tap, tap. And I know it's still out there, waiting. When I was 12, my family rented a cabin by a lake for the summer. It was one of those rustic places with no Wi-Fi, no TV, and spotty phone service. My parents called it a tech detox, but to me it felt more like a prison sentence. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to stretch on forever. The only neighbors were a few scattered cabins along the other side of the lake, barely visible through the trees. The first few days were uneventful. I spent most of my time reading old paperbacks I'd found on the cabin's dusty bookshelf or skipping stones along the shore. The lake was quiet, too quiet. There were no birds, no frogs, not even the usual buzz of insects. just the occasional ripple on the surface of the water, as if something had disturbed it from beneath. The weirdness started around the third night. I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of footsteps outside my window. Soft, deliberate steps, crunching on the dry leaves just beyond the wall. I froze, holding my breath, heart hammering in my chest. My bed was right under the window, so I was too afraid to even sit up and look. I kept waiting for the sound to go away, but it didn't. Whoever or whatever it was, it just stood there. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. That awful sensation of being watched crept over me, making every hair on my body stand on end. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The next morning, I told my parents, hoping they'd take me seriously. But they just laughed it off, saying it was probably a deer or some other animal wandering through the woods. "We're in nature, kiddo," my dad said, ruffling my hair. "There's going to be noises." That day, I tried to shake off the fear. I explored the edge of the woods, wandered up and down the shore, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods felt off, like they were hiding something just out of sight. That night it came back. The footsteps were louder this time, circling the cabin slowly, deliberately. I lay in bed, paralyzed with fear, staring at the ceiling and hoping it would go away. I kept waiting for my parents to wake up and check the noise, but they didn't stir. The footsteps stopped right outside my window again, and then something tapped against the glass. It wasn't loud, just a soft tap, 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 like a fingernail brushing the window. My heart raced, and I clamped my hands over my mouth to stop myself from screaming. I knew if I looked, I'd see something staring back at me from the darkness. I stayed that way for what felt like hours, every muscle in my body locked with terror, until exhaustion finally pulled me back to sleep. The next morning, I checked the ground outside the window, expecting to see footprints in the dirt. But there was nothing. No disturbed leaves, no sign that anything or anyone had been there. That's when I knew it wasn't an animal. The following night, I kept a flashlight under my pillow. If it came back, I told myself I'd shine the light on it and see what it was. I don't know what I thought that would accomplish. Maybe if I saw it, it would stop being scary. Maybe it would just turn out to be some kid playing a prank. But what I saw wasn't a kid. It came back around 2 a.m., the footsteps slow and deliberate, circling the cabin just like before. I lay perfectly still, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles ached. The footsteps stopped outside my window, and then the tapping started again, tap, tap, tap. I counted to 3 in my head, then rolled over and flicked on the flashlight, aiming it right at the window. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. There was a face staring at me through the glass. But it wasn't human. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched too tight over its skull. The eyes were black, round, and far too large for its face, with no whites, just endless, glossy darkness. It had no nose, just 2 small slits, and its mouth was a thin, lipless line that stretched into a grin far too wide for comfort. It pressed its hand against the glass, a long, spindly thing with fingers that ended in sharp points. It leaned closer, its black eyes glittering with what I can only describe as curiosity. And then it smiled. The grin stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, needle-thin teeth. It tapped its claw-like fingers against the glass again. Tap, 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 as if to say, "I see you." I don't know how long I stared at it, too terrified to move, too afraid to even blink. Eventually, it tilted its head, as if disappointed, and slowly backed away into the darkness of the woods. I lay awake for the rest of the night, flashlight clutched in my hands, too scared to move. In the morning, I told my parents everything, but they didn't believe me. They said it was just a nightmare, the product of an overactive imagination. That day, I refused to go outside. I stayed inside the cabin, watching the woods from the window, waiting for it to come back. But it didn't. Not during the day, at least. We left the cabin a few days later, and I tried to convince myself it had all been a bad dream. But every now and then, I'll catch a glimpse of movement at the edge of my vision, just a flash of pale skin or the glint of black eyes, and my heart will race all over again. I haven't gone camping since, and sometimes, late at night, When the world is quiet and the shadows seem too deep, I swear I can hear it. Tap, tap, tap. And I know it's still out there, waiting. For the past year and a half, I've been pretending to know how to swim. My boyfriend is a total water baby. He grew up near the beach, spent summers lifeguarding, and treats every body of water like it's his personal playground. Me? I can barely dog paddle without feeling like I'm drowning. But instead of telling him the truth, I panicked on our second date and told him I love swimming. And now I'm trapped in a never-ending aquatic lie. It started at the community pool. He invited me to go swimming, and I figured, how hard can it be? I just won't go in too deep. I showed up in a cute swimsuit, acting like I was totally comfortable, even though the last time I'd been in a pool was when I accidentally slipped into the deep end at a birthday party at age 9 and had to be fished out by someone's uncle. He jumped into the water with the grace of a dolphin, while I carefully lowered myself down the pool ladder like a grandma easing into a hot tub. "Come on, babe," he said, splashing me playfully. "Swim over here." I panicked. If I tried to freestyle my way over, I'd look like a drowning cat. So I pulled out my first trick. I swam underwater. I held my breath and frog kicked my way across, hoping he wouldn't notice how frantically my legs were flailing beneath the surface. When I finally surfaced, gasping for air, he grinned. "You're a great swimmer." And that, my friend, was the moment I knew I was in deep, literally and metaphorically. From that day on, swimming became our thing. Weekend trips to the pool, spontaneous beach days, paddleboarding on lakes. Every time we went somewhere with water, I had to come up with new ways to fake my skills. I got really good at relaxing in the shallow end and saying, "I just love floating, it's so peaceful." But floating only gets you so far. One time, he asked if I wanted to race across the pool. I had to fake an ankle cramp halfway through to avoid drowning in front of a group of toddlers doing laps. "Guess I overdid it," I said, clutching my leg dramatically. He carried me out of the pool, looking so concerned that I felt both guilty and relieved. Then came the beach trip. He thought it would be fun to swim out to the buoy. You know the one. The giant floating marker bobbing halfway to international waters. I agreed, thinking I could just paddle behind him and maybe take a break halfway. Spoiler, there was no halfway. About 5 minutes in, I realized I was way out of my depth, literally. The shore looked like a distant memory. The waves were getting choppier, and my just keep floating strategy wasn't holding up. I seriously considered faking a shark sighting just to abort the mission. But my boyfriend was swimming ahead, carefree as ever, and I couldn't bring myself to call for help without blowing my cover. So I did the only thing I could think of. I faked intense admiration. "Babe, wait," I called, waving him back. I love watching you swim. You're so graceful. It's honestly inspiring." He swam back, beaming. "You think so?" And just like that, I was off the hook. I spent the rest of the afternoon sunbathing on the shore, clapping and cheering every time he did another lap. But now I'm in real trouble. He just signed us up for couples snorkeling lessons. Apparently, he's always dreamed of swimming together through coral reefs, hand in hand, like those picture-perfect couples on Instagram. "It'll be so romantic," he said, showing me videos of people gracefully gliding underwater with tropical fish swirling around them. Meanwhile, I'm frantically Googling, how hard is snorkeling? And can you fake snorkel without dying? I've even started watching YouTube tutorials on the proper way to breathe through a snorkel. Spoiler, it looks a lot easier than it actually is. I know I need to tell him the truth. I can't exactly fake my way through an underwater excursion without, drowning. But every time I try to bring it up, he gets this excited, dreamy look in his eyes and I chicken out. What if he thinks I've been lying about more than just swimming? What if he realizes I'm not the cool, adventurous girlfriend he thinks I am? The truth is, I want to be that person. I want to dive into the ocean with him, fearless and carefree. I want to share those magical moments under the waves. But I'm also terrified of, dying in flippers. So I've come up with a plan. I'll tell him the truth right before the snorkeling class. That way, the instructor can teach me the basics, and hopefully, I won't embarrass myself too much. Worst case scenario, I cling to a life jacket the whole time and call it romantic buoyancy. Or maybe I'll just admit that I'm not perfect. Maybe I'll tell him that I've been faking it because I didn't want to let him down. And maybe, just maybe, he'll think it's kind of funny. After all, love isn't about being perfect, right? It's about being honest, even if that honesty comes with a side of floaty. The day we released 100 crickets in school, it started, as all terrible ideas do, with Jake sitting at our lunch table, picking through a sad-looking sandwich and muttering, "This place needs more life." More what? I asked, already regretting my curiosity. Life, movement, chaos. He drummed his fingers on the table. Something to shake things up. Now, if Jake ever told you he wanted to shake things up, you knew trouble was brewing. He leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was planning a bank heist. "I found a pet store downtown. They sell crickets." Dave stopped mid-chew. "Crickets?" "Yeah," Jake grinned. 100 of them. $5. They're meant for feeding lizards, but I'm thinking we let them loose in the school. I blinked. "You're insane." Jake shrugged. "Insanity is just brilliance people don't understand yet." Dave shook his head, already laughing. "Dude, you realize those things are going to get everywhere, right? Like, forever." "That," Jake said with the confidence of a future criminal mastermind, "is the point." And just like that, the plan was born. We were going to release 100 crickets into the school. The next day after school, Jake swung by the pet store. When he showed up at my house, grinning like a lunatic, he was holding a brown paper bag filled with tiny plastic containers. "Behold," he said dramatically, pulling out one of the containers. Inside were about a dozen crickets, chirping away like a barbershop quartet from hell. "This is a terrible idea," I whispered. Jake grinned. "Yup." We met up with Dave and Brian that evening in the parking lot behind the school. Our plan was simple. Sneak in early the next morning, release the crickets, and let the chaos unfold. Brian was on lookout duty, mainly because the last time we involved him directly in one of our schemes, he crashed a van into a trash can. "Don't worry," he said, cracking open a Mountain Dew. "I'll honk if anyone's coming." That was not reassuring, but we were already committed. The next morning, we arrived at school just before sunrise. The doors were unlocked because, as always, our school was terrible at basic security. We slipped inside, carrying the paper bag filled with cricket containers, and headed straight for the main hallway. Jake rubbed his hands together, giddy with excitement. "All right, gentlemen," he whispered. "Let's liberate some crickets." We each took a section of the school. Dave handled the science wing, Brian took the library, for reasons none of us questioned, and Jake and I covered the hallways and bathrooms. The process was simple. Open the container, tip it over, and run like hell. The first few releases went smoothly. We opened the containers, and the crickets jumped out, scattering across the floor in every direction. They chirped loudly, like a tiny orchestra warming up for the apocalypse. I dumped one container into the bathroom, where the crickets immediately made themselves at home under the sinks and in the toilet stalls. Jake, meanwhile, was whistling happily as he emptied crickets into every locker he could find. "It's like Christmas morning," he said, wiping fake tears from his eyes. By the time the first bell rang, 100 crickets were officially free. At first, nobody noticed. The morning started as usual, with teachers herding half-asleep students into classrooms. But then, the chirping began. It started as a faint, rhythmic sound, like nature's most annoying soundtrack. At first, people thought it was just one cricket, annoying but manageable. But then the noise grew louder, and louder, and louder. Within minutes, the entire school was alive with chirping. Crickets were crawling out of lockers, hopping across the cafeteria, and my personal favorite, jumping out of the water fountains whenever someone tried to take a drink. In the middle of first period, a girl screamed when a cricket leaped onto her notebook. The class erupted into chaos as students tried to swat the tiny invader off her desk. Mr. Peterson, the history teacher, stood frozen at the whiteboard, staring in disbelief as 3 crickets bounced across his shoes. By second period, things had spiraled out of control. Students were running through the hallways, yelling about the infestation. The janitor showed up with a broom, frantically sweeping crickets toward the door like it was the world's worst rodeo. Someone tried to catch one in a sandwich bag. It didn't work, and then, because of course it did, the fire alarm went off. Nobody knows exactly what triggered the alarm. Some say it was a student panicking when a cricket jumped into her hair. Others claim it was Mr. Haggerty, the principal, trying to flush the crickets out of the school with chaos. Either way, the entire school was evacuated. We filed out onto the lawn, standing in neat rows like we were preparing for a fire drill. Except this time, half the students were covered in crickets. Jake grinned ear to ear, watching the pandemonium unfold like he was the proud father of a masterpiece. "This," he whispered, "is the greatest thing we've ever done." Meanwhile, Mr. Haggerty was stomping across the lawn, his face bright red with rage. He cornered the janitor, demanding to know how the crickets got inside. The janitor just shrugged, holding up a dustpan full of squirming insects. "They're everywhere, man," he muttered, looking utterly defeated. The next few hours were a blur. Teachers tried and failed to restore order. Classes were canceled. The janitor gave up entirely, muttering something about retiring early. By the end of the day, the school was still swarming with crickets. Every time someone opened a locker, at least 3 more would hop out, chirping gleefully. And the sound? It never stopped. The chirping echoed through the hallways like some kind of demented white noise machine, driving everyone to the brink of madness. Jake, of course, was thrilled. "This is what I mean by more life," he said, as if we were discussing a work of art. Dave shook his head, half laughing, half panicking. "Dude, these things are going to be here for years." The aftermath was legendary. They tried everything: exterminators, glue traps, even hiring a guy with a lizard to eat the crickets. Nothing worked. Months later, the chirping could still be heard in random classrooms and vents. Some said it became part of the school's identity. We, of course, got caught. Not immediately, but someone snitched, probably Brian. He's terrible at keeping secrets. Jake got suspended for a week and banned from any school events for the rest of the semester. But the story of the great cricket release became the stuff of legend. Every year, new students heard whispers about that one time when the entire school was overrun with crickets. Teachers still refused to talk about it. And the janitor? He actually did retire. Jake? He walked away from it all like a hero. "We didn't just pull a prank," he said, grinning like the chaotic mastermind he is. "We made art." And honestly, I think he was right. It's a lazy Sunday afternoon, and I'm in line at a bakery, waiting for my turn to order something sweet because I've convinced myself I deserve a treat. The place smells like warm cinnamon and fresh bread, and there's a small crowd forming, everyone eyeing the display case like it holds the secrets to happiness. The line is moving painfully slow, of course it is, and I'm trying to decide between a croissant and a cookie the size of a dinner plate when someone steps in a line behind me. At first, I don't pay much attention, just another person craving carbs like the rest of us. But then, I catch a glimpse of him in the reflection of the glass display case. He's tall with dark hair that's a little too long to be tidy and just messy enough to look effortlessly good. He's got that "I woke up 5 minutes ago, but somehow I make it work" look, wearing a black hoodie and sneakers like he just rolled out of bed and decided pastry was the answer to life's problems. Honestly, I respect that energy. He notices me looking because of course he does, and instead of pretending he didn't catch me staring, he grins. "You look like someone who's trying to make a very serious life decision." I smirk, gesturing toward the case. "It's harder than it looks. Croissant or cookie? What's the right move here?" Without missing a beat, he leans in slightly, inspecting the options like it's a matter of national importance. Oof. Tough call. The croissant's classic. But the cookie? That's the kind of decision you make when you've fully given up on pretending to be healthy. I laugh, already liking the way this conversation is going. So, what's the verdict? Do I cling to a shred of self-respect, or do I go full cookie? He tilts his head thoughtfully, as if this requires deep contemplation. Honestly, I think you go cookie. Life's short. Might as well eat something the size of your face. I grin. Solid logic. I like how you think. The line inches forward, and as we shuffle closer to the front, the conversation keeps flowing effortlessly. He's funny, but not in a way that feels rehearsed, just quick-witted and laid back, like this kind of banter is second nature to him. "So, what's your go-to here?" I ask. "You strike me as a scone guy." He gives me a mock-wounded look. Wow, that's harsh. I didn't realize I was projecting scone energy. I laugh. All right, I'll bite. What's your actual order? He leans in like he's about to share a secret. Chocolate croissant. Every time. The key is convincing yourself it's breakfast food, even though it's basically dessert. I knew it, I say, playfully narrowing my eyes at him. You're a pastry philosopher. He grins, and just like that, I realize how rare it is to meet someone who can make standing in line for baked goods feel this fun. There's no awkwardness, no weird pickup vibe, just an easy back and forth that makes the slow-moving line almost enjoyable. Finally, we reach the front, and I order the cookie, as he suggested. The cashier asks if I want anything else, and before I can overthink it, I turn to him with a grin. You want a chocolate croissant? My treat for the expert advice. He raises an eyebrow, clearly amused but not about to refuse. Bold move. I respect that. I add his croissant to the order, pay for everything, and step aside to let him grab his drink while I wait for our pastries. He leans casually against the counter, glancing at me with that same playful grin. All right, he says. What's the catch? No catch, I reply, shrugging. Just figured you earned it. He laughs, taking the croissant from the barista with a nod of thanks. You know, he says, this is dangerously close to the best bakery encounter I've ever had. Oh, is that so? I tease. Do you hang out in bakeries often, or is this just a happy accident? Let's call it fate, he says, winking. Two pastry lovers, destined to meet over carbs. I laugh, shaking my head. You're ridiculous. Yeah, he says with a grin, but you bought me a croissant, so you're stuck with me now. Our orders are ready, and I grab my cookie from the counter, holding it up like a victory prize. Well, thanks for the pastry wisdom, mysterious croissant guy. He raises his croissant in a mock toast. And thank you, cookie lady. This has been a truly life-changing experience. I'm about to make a witty exit when he pulls a napkin from the counter, grabs a pen from his pocket. Seriously, who carries a pen these days? And scribbles something on it. He folds it neatly and hands it to me with a playful smile. In case you ever need a pastry buddy, he says casually. I take the napkin, glancing down to see his name, Ethan, and his number scrawled in messy handwriting. It's such a small gesture, but it leaves me smiling in a way I wasn't expecting. Thanks, Ethan, I say, tucking the napkin into my bag. I'll keep that in mind. He flashes one last grin, croissant in hand, and heads toward the door. I stand there for a moment, cookie in one hand, napkin in the other, and realize that maybe, just maybe, this dreary Sunday afternoon turned out better than expected. And yeah, I texted him, because honestly, anyone who can turn a bakery line into a fun, flirty encounter is someone worth getting to know. And let's be real, there's always room for another pastry adventure. There's nothing quite like a hot tub, warm, relaxing, and just the right amount of luxury to make you feel like a celebrity on vacation. Until the jets betray you and you almost meet your watery doom in the dumbest way possible. This story starts on what should have been the most relaxing weekend of my life. A couple of friends had invited me to join them at a rented cabin in the mountains. It was beautiful, cozy fireplace, lots of wine, and best of all, a hot tub. Now, I don't know about you, but there's something about sitting in hot water that makes me think, yeah, this is the height of human achievement. No thoughts, no worries, just bubbles, steam, and my tired body soaking in the good life. So, when we got to the cabin and saw that hot tub, I didn't waste any time. I poured myself a drink, threw on my swim trunks, and slid into the water like a beached seal reclaiming the ocean. It was perfect. For the first 15 minutes, everything was bliss. I leaned back against the jets, letting them massage my sore shoulders, and took a sip of my drink. Life was good. In fact, life was too good. That's how trouble always starts, isn't it? You get too comfortable, and the universe decides to remind you that you're just a dumb, mortal idiot floating through space on borrowed time. So there I was, half submerged in bubbly paradise, when I noticed one of the jets wasn't working quite right. It kept sputtering, on off, like it was trying to cough something up. Naturally, instead of just ignoring it like a sane person, I leaned forward to get a closer look. This was mistake number one. As I leaned down to inspect the jet, I shifted my weight just a little too far forward. Before I could react, my feet slipped off the seat, and suddenly I was face first in the water. No big deal, right? Just push yourself up and sit back down. Easy. Except, I didn't push myself up. I couldn't. The combination of slippery seats, roaring jets, and my own clumsy body created the perfect storm. As I tried to lift my head, the jets blasted me in the face with a wall of water. I gasped for air, which was a mistake because all I got was a mouthful of chlorinated bubbles. Panic hit me instantly. I thrashed around like an idiot trying to get my bearings, but the harder I struggled, the worse it got. The jets were relentless, spraying water up my nose and into my eyes. I couldn't find the edge of the seat. My arms were flailing uselessly, and my legs were kicking out in the stupidest way possible. It was like my brain forgot how swimming or basic movement worked. At that moment, one horrifying thought crossed my mind. This is it. I'm going to drown in 2 feet of water. Not the deep ocean, not a raging river, a goddamn hot tub. The shame of it hit me as hard as the water jets. My obituary would be an absolute nightmare. Died doing what he loved, panicking in a spa. My friends would tell the story for years. Every time hot tubs came up, they'd laugh and say, "Remember when he almost drowned himself for no reason?" Somehow, I managed to flip myself onto my back, sputtering and coughing like a fish that had flopped onto land. I was still half submerged, gasping for air and blinking against the bubbles. Every time I tried to sit up, the jets shoved me back like they were saying, "Nah, buddy, stay down where you belong." This was officially a battle between me and the tub was winning. Finally, after what felt like a full-blown underwater wrestling match, I managed to grab the edge of the hot tub and haul myself upright. I sat there for a moment, drenched, wheezing, and blinking like an idiot. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when my friend Lisa poked her head out the cabin door. "You good?" she called, holding a beer and clearly having no idea that I had just gone 12 rounds with a luxury spa feature. "Yep," I croaked, trying to sound casual while wiping water off my face. "Just, adjusting the jets." Lisa shrugged, gave me a thumbs up, and went back inside, leaving me alone with my shame. I sat there, catching my breath and glaring at the bubbling water like it had personally betrayed me. My drink was floating nearby, bobbing up and down like a tiny, mocking buoy. I grabbed it, took a long sip, and thought, well, that could have gone worse. Later that night, after I'd recovered enough to tell the story without crying, I gathered my friends and explained what had happened. They laughed so hard they nearly fell out of their chairs. "So wait, you almost drowned in a hot tub?" Lisa wheezed, wiping tears from her eyes. "Yes," I muttered. "I'm aware of how stupid it sounds. And let me tell you, they have not let me live it down. Every time we go near water, pool, beach, even the rain, someone inevitably says, 'Hey, watch out. Don't let the water win this time.' These days, I approach hot tubs with a lot more caution. I sit far away from the jets. I take slow, measured sips of my drinks, and I always keep my footing. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Water may be relaxing, but it's also waiting for you to slip up. And when it does, it doesn't care how dumb your death is going to look. So yeah, if anyone asks me why I tense up whenever I get into a hot tub, I just say, let's just say I've seen some things. And you know what? That's all the explanation they need. A few months ago, I started a new job at an office building downtown. It was a decent place, tall and modern, with sleek glass walls and polished marble floors. The building had a lobby that stretched 2 stories high, a fancy coffee bar in the corner, and a bank of 6 elevators that whisked people up to their offices. My job was on the 14th floor, so I got used to riding those elevators multiple times a day. The first week passed without anything unusual happening. I would walk into the lobby, tap my ID on the reader, and take the elevator up to my floor along with other employees. But one night, I had to stay late to finish a project. By the time I wrapped up, it was nearly 10 p.m., and the office was completely empty. I grabbed my bag, locked up, and made my way to the elevators. The hallways were eerily quiet, lit only by dim emergency lights. I pressed the button for the elevator, and after a moment, the doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside, hit the button for the lobby, and leaned against the wall, exhausted. The elevator hummed to life, and I watched the numbers above the door light up as it descended. 13, 12, 11. The hum of the elevator was steady, almost soothing, and I was already thinking about crashing in bed when something strange happened. The elevator didn't stop at the lobby. Instead, it kept going down. Now, there were only 14 floors in the building, plus the lobby and basement parking. But after the lobby button lit up, the display kept counting down. -1, -2, -3. I frowned, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. The elevator kept descending, deeper and deeper, far past the basement level. There was no sound except the hum of the motor and the occasional clink of the cables as they moved through the shaft. By the time it hit -10, my hands were sweating. I pressed the button for the lobby again, hoping it was just some kind of glitch, but nothing happened. The elevator just kept going. The air inside the car felt wrong, heavy. It was cold, but I could feel sweat trickling down my back. My heart pounded in my chest, and the numbers continued ticking downward. -11, -12. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a technical issue. Maybe there was an old sub-level, something I hadn't been told about. But that didn't explain the way the lights inside the car flickered, or the faint sound I could hear just beyond the elevator walls. It was soft at first, like distant footsteps echoing through the shaft. Then, as the numbers dropped lower, I started hearing something else. A voice. It was faint, barely audible over the hum of the motor, but I could hear it. Someone whispering. I pressed my ear against the cold metal wall, trying to make out the words, but they were garbled, like the person was speaking underwater. Then the elevator stopped. The display read -17. For a moment, everything was still. I stood there, frozen, my hand hovering over the emergency button. The air was so cold now that I could see my breath. The whispering had stopped, leaving only the hum of the elevator and my own ragged breathing. Then the doors slid open. What I saw on the other side made my skin crawl. It wasn't a basement or a storage room or anything that belonged in an office building. It was a long, narrow hallway, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights. The walls were concrete, cracked and stained with something dark. The floor was covered in a thin layer of water, and the air smelled of mildew and rust. And at the far end of the hallway, I saw a figure. It stood perfectly still, just barely visible in the flickering light. It was tall and thin, with long, drooping arms that hung almost to the floor. I couldn't see its face. Its head was tilted downward, as if it was looking at the ground. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at it, but every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay inside the elevator. My hand hovered over the door close button, shaking violently. Then slowly the figure began to move. It took one slow, deliberate step forward, then another. Its limbs swayed unnaturally, like they didn't belong to a person. As it moved, I could hear the faint splashing of water under its feet, the sound echoing down the hallway. I slammed the door close button, jabbing it over and over with both hands. The doors groaned, like they didn't want to shut, and for one horrifying second, I thought they wouldn't. The figure took another step, its head still bowed. The doors finally slid shut with a soft thud, and the elevator jolted upward. I staggered back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The numbers on the display began ticking up again, and I watched them in terrified silence, praying that I wouldn't stop on any more strange floors. When the elevator finally reached the lobby, I nearly cried with relief. The doors slid open, revealing the bright, familiar space of the lobby, with its shiny floors and silent coffee bar. I stumbled out of the elevator, my legs shaky, and ran straight to the front desk. The security guard on duty looked up from his phone, surprised to see me. "Hey," he said, frowning. "You okay?" I was too out of breath to respond right away. When I finally caught my breath, I asked him the only thing I could think of. "Does this building have any floors below the basement?" The guard gave me a puzzled look. "No, just the parking level." I stared at him, my skin crawling. But I stammered. "The elevator, it went down, way down." The guard shook his head, clearly confused. "That's not possible. The elevators don't go below the basement. They're locked out at night, too." I wanted to argue, to tell him what I'd seen, but I knew how crazy it sounded. I muttered a quick thanks and left the building as fast as I could, swearing to myself that I'd never work late again. I'll try to make sense of what happened that night, but I still can't. Every time I get in an elevator now, I feel that same cold knot of fear in my stomach. And sometimes when I ride alone, I swear I hear that faint, distant whispering. And when the elevator doors open, I always hesitate just for a second, because one day I know they might open to that hallway again. And this time, the figure won't be standing so far away. If I could wipe one night from my memory forever, it would be this one. It started out like an ordinary night at a friend's birthday party, but by the time it was over, I'd managed to ruin a friendship, torch a potential relationship, and embarrass myself so thoroughly that I still can't think about it without cringing. It's the kind of story that follows you for life. The party was for my friend Sam, who was turning 30. It was one of those big, blowout house parties, people spilling out into the backyard, music blasting, way too much alcohol everywhere. I wasn't planning on doing anything stupid that night. I'd even told myself on the way there, just keep it simple. Hang out, have a couple of drinks, don't get involved in anyone's drama. That lasted about an hour. There were two people at the party that I should have avoided like the plague. My friend Chloe and a girl named Natalie. Chloe was an ex-fling. One of those almost but not quite situations that fizzled out before it became anything serious. We'd hooked up a few times over the past year, but it never turned into anything, mostly because neither of us was looking for a relationship. Still, there was always this weird tension between us, like an old wound that hadn't fully healed. Natalie, on the other hand, was someone I just started talking to. We'd been texting for a couple of weeks, and things were starting to feel promising. She was funny, smart, gorgeous, and, crucially, she had no idea about my history with Chloe. The plan for the night was to use the party as a chance to spend more time with Natalie, get to know her better, and hopefully leave things on a good note. But Chloe had other plans. As soon as I walked into the party, Chloe spotted me from across the room. She gave me that slow, familiar smile, the one that always meant trouble. I knew right then and there that avoiding her was going to be impossible. "Hey, stranger," she said, pulling me into a hug that lasted just a little too long. "Missed you." Hey," I muttered awkwardly, already glancing around to see if Natalie had arrived. Chloe followed my gaze, her smile shifting into something sharper. "Looking for someone?" "No, just saying hi to everyone." She gave me a look that said she knew I was lying. "Well, don't be a stranger," she said, brushing her hand against my arm before disappearing into the crowd. I took a deep breath, grabbed a beer, and tried to focus. "Just stay cool. You've got this." About 20 minutes later, Natalie showed up. She looked incredible. Black dress, bright smile, the kind of entrance that makes you forget how to form sentences for a second. We hugged, and I felt that rush of excitement you get when you realize the person you've been thinking about is even better in person. "So glad you made it," I said, trying not to sound too eager. "Of course," she smiled. "This place is packed." We started talking, and for a while, everything felt great. Easy, natural. I thought, okay, maybe this night won't be a complete disaster after all. Then Chloe showed up again. She slid into the conversation like she belonged there, her smile just a little too bright. "Hey, Natalie, right? I'm Chloe. I've known this guy forever." She gave me a playful nudge that made my stomach sink. Natalie smiled politely, but I could tell she was confused. "Oh, cool. How do you guys know each other?" "Oh, we've spent some time together," Chloe said, her tone dripping with implication. "Isn't that right?" I felt my soul leave my body. Natalie raised an eyebrow, giving me a look that said, "What exactly is she talking about?" "It's complicated," I stammered, trying to play it off. "We're just friends." Chloe's grin widened. "Friends with benefits, you mean?" I wanted to crawl into a hole and die. Natalie blinked, clearly trying to process what she'd just heard. "Oh," she said, her voice flat. "Good to know." "Anyway," Chloe continued, as if she hadn't just dropped a social grenade into the conversation, "I just wanted to say hi. Don't let me interrupt." She gave me a wink and sauntered off, leaving me standing there with Natalie, who looked like she was rethinking every decision that had led her to this moment. I tried to salvage things, but the damage was done. "So, Chloe," Natalie said, crossing her arms. "You guys hooked up?" "Yeah, but it was a long time ago," I said quickly. "It's over." completely over. She gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Right? Sure. The conversation limped along for a few more minutes, but the vibe was shot. Natalie excused herself to grab another drink and didn't come back. I stood there feeling like the world's biggest idiot, watching her disappear into the crowd. I thought things couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. About an hour later, I was sitting on the couch, trying to drown my embarrassment in beer, when Chloe plopped down beside me. "So, how'd it go with Natalie?" she asked, clearly enjoying herself. "Not great," I muttered. "Thanks for that, by the way." She shrugged, completely unapologetic. "What can I say? Old habits die hard." I shot her a look, but she just laughed, leaning back on the couch like she owned the place. And then, because I apparently hadn't learned anything from the night's events, I made another terrible decision. I kissed her. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the frustration. Or maybe, deep down, I just wanted to feel like I hadn't completely screwed everything up. Whatever the reason, the second my lips touched hers, I knew it was a mistake. But Chloe kissed me back, and for a few minutes, I forgot about Natalie, about the party, about everything except the warmth of her body against mine. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Natalie. She was standing in the doorway, staring at us with a look that was somewhere between disbelief and disgust. "Wow," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. Then she turned and walked away. I jumped up, guilt crashing over me in waves. "Natalie, wait." But she was already gone. The aftermath was brutal. Natalie ghosted me completely. No texts, no calls, nothing. I didn't blame her. As for Chloe, she thought the whole thing was hilarious. "You've really got to stop overcomplicating things," she told me with a grin. I stopped talking to her not long after that. And as for Sam's birthday, yeah, I pretty much ruined that too. Word got around fast about what happened, and I became that guy in our friend group. The one who couldn't keep his personal life from turning into a dumpster fire. To this day, I still cringe every time I think about that night. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a full-blown disaster. And the worst part? I've got no one to blame but myself. It happened 3 months ago. My roommate, Greg, disappeared for 2 days. At first, I didn't think much of it. Greg was the kind of guy who'd vanish on a whim. Spontaneous road trips, crashing at a friend's place after a party, that sort of thing. He'd always come back with some half-baked excuse and a grin, and life would go on like nothing happened. But this time felt different. His phone went straight to voicemail. None of his friends had seen him. The weirdest part? His car was still parked in the driveway. By the second day, I started to worry. I thought about calling the cops, but I didn't want to overreact. I figured he'd roll in drunk at some ungodly hour, mumbling something about needing space, or how he'd met some girl. That's just who Greg was. Except, that's not what happened. On the morning of the third day, I woke up to the sound of the front door creaking open. I bolted out of bed, heart racing, and ran to the living room. There he was, standing in the doorway. Greg, looking perfectly normal, as if nothing had happened. "Hey man," he said with a sheepish grin. "Sorry, I needed a couple of days to clear my head." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to yell at him for scaring me half to death. But instead, all I felt was relief. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked. Greg just shrugged. "Around." That's all he gave me. No real explanation, no details, just around. Typical Greg. Except something was off. He looked the same messy brown hair, same lazy smile, same beat-up hoodie, but he felt different. It's hard to explain. It was like standing next to someone you've known for years and suddenly realizing they're a stranger. But I let it go. I was just happy he was back. At first, things seemed normal. Greg went back to his usual routine. Sleeping late, leaving dishes in the sink, binge-watching old sitcoms on the couch. But as the days went by, I started noticing little things. Things that didn't make sense. He used to hate black coffee, couldn't stand the taste, but now he drank it every morning, black as night, like he'd been doing it his whole life. He started listening to music he used to make fun of, old jazz records I didn't even know he had. And he was quieter too, not in an obvious way, just off, like he was trying to remember how to be himself. One night, I found him standing in the kitchen, staring at the fridge with the door wide open. When I asked what he was doing, He just blinked at me, like I'd caught him in the middle of something he wasn't supposed to be doing. "Just thinking," he said, and shut the fridge without taking anything out. It was small stuff, but it started piling up. The way he folded his laundry differently. The way he hesitated before answering simple questions, like he needed an extra second to get it right. And then there was the thing with his handwriting. Greg used to have terrible handwriting. Messy, uneven, impossible to read. But now, his grocery lists looked like they were written by someone else entirely. Perfect, neat letters, every line evenly spaced. People change, I told myself. He was gone for a couple of days. Maybe he's trying to turn over a new leaf. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't Greg. One night, things came to a head. I was sitting on the couch, half watching a movie when Greg walked in. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching me. Not saying anything, not moving, just standing there with that same lazy smile that no longer felt like his. "You okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me. "Yeah, just thinking about how weird it is, how well we know the people we live with." There was something in his voice, a quiet, knowing edge that sent a shiver down my spine. I forced a laugh. "Yeah, I guess." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then, without another word, he walked down the hall to his room. That night, I locked my bedroom door. I don't know why. I just had to. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was reading too much into things. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the man sleeping in the next room wasn't my friend. Then last week, I found the note. It was tucked under the couch, crumpled and dirty, like it had been dropped there accidentally. At first, I thought it was trash, just some old receipt or grocery list. But when I unfolded it, my blood ran cold. It was Greg's handwriting. The old, messy handwriting I remembered. The note was short. Just 4 words scrawled in shaky, uneven letters. "That's not me. Run." I stared at the note, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. If Greg had written this, then who the hell was living in my apartment? I packed a bag that night, threw it in my car, and left. I didn't tell Greg, or whatever was pretending to be Greg, where I was going. I didn't say goodbye. I've been crashing on a friend's couch for the past few days, trying to figure out what to do next. I haven't gone back to the apartment, and I haven't answered any of Greg's texts. The messages are short, just things like, "Where are you?" and "We need to talk." But last night, I got one that made my skin crawl. It just said, "You shouldn't have run." I don't know what's pretending to be Greg. I don't know where the real Greg is, or if he's even still alive. All I know is I can't go back, because whatever that thing is, it knows I figured it out, and now it's looking for me. The job was supposed to be simple. Meet at a cafe. Table 7. Client requested a normal conversation. I wasn't sure what that even meant. Wasn't every conversation normal by definition? But hey, if all I had to do was talk over a cup of coffee to get paid, I wasn't going to complain. The cafe was small, tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and little potted plants on the tables. I liked it immediately. The air smelled like espresso and cinnamon, and soft indie music played in the background, barely loud enough to notice. I found table 7 in the corner by the window. The man sitting there had his hands folded on the table, his coffee untouched. He looked nervous, like he'd been waiting longer than he intended, but there was something kind about his face. Maybe the way his brown eyes crinkled a little at the edges when he noticed me. "Hi," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I'm Jade." Yep, still Jade. At this point, it's basically who I am when I'm working. "Nice to meet you," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I'm Owen." He seemed ordinary enough, mid-30s, a little tired around the eyes, dressed in a plaid button-up and jeans. The kind of guy you might pass a dozen times on the street without noticing. But something about the way he looked at me, like he was measuring his words before speaking, told me this was anything but ordinary for him. "So," I said with a smile, "what kind of normal conversation are we having today?" Owen chuckled a little awkwardly. "Honestly, I have no idea. I haven't had one of those in a while." "Then let's wing it," I said, leaning back in my chair. "We'll just talk about whatever comes to mind. No pressure." He smiled, looking grateful for the suggestion. "That sounds nice." At first, the conversation was slow, a little stilted. I asked the usual questions. "Where are you from?" What do you do? And he answered politely, but without much enthusiasm. He worked in insurance, had moved to the city a few years ago, and liked hiking when he could find the time. It was the kind of small talk you'd expect on a first date, but there was a tension beneath it, like we were both waiting for something more to happen. And then about 20 minutes in, he surprised me. I used to think life would get easier once I got everything figured out, he said, stirring his coffee absently. You know, like once you have a job, a routine, all that. But now that I've got it, it feels like something's missing. I tilted my head, curious. What do you think's missing? He hesitated, tapping the edge of his coffee cup. I don't know. Connection, maybe? It feels like I just go through the motions every day, work, eat, sleep, repeat. I have friends, but we mostly text. And it's like everyone's so busy. There's no space to just be with someone, you know? I nodded, understanding more than I expected to. Yeah, I get that. Owen gave me a small, almost relieved smile. I didn't know it was going to feel this way. I always thought loneliness was obvious. Like, you'd know when you were lonely. But it just sneaks up on you, doesn't it? Yeah, I said quietly. It really does. For a while, we just sat there, watching the rain drizzle against the window. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was the kind of silence that felt like an exhale, like letting go of something you didn't realize you were holding on to. Eventually, Owen asked, "What about you? Do you ever feel that way?" All the time, I admitted, surprising even myself with the honesty. I think everyone does. Some people are just better at hiding it. He gave a small nod, like that answer made sense. It's weird, isn't it? How we're all lonely, but no one talks about it. Yeah, I said, but at least we're talking about it now. Owen smiled, and for the first time all night, it looked real. The conversation drifted after that, easier, lighter. We talked about stupid things like which pizza toppings are unforgivable, pineapple, according to Owen, and whether or not aliens are real. He had this quiet sense of humor that snuck up on me, and before I knew it, I was laughing, really laughing, not the polite kind you fake to fill awkward silences. And just like that, the night started to feel less like work and more like, well, exactly what Owen had wanted in normal conversation. Somewhere between coffee refills, he asked, "Do you believe people are meant to find each other?" I gave it some thought. I think people just stumble into each other when they need to. Whether or not it means anything is up to them. Owen smiled, as if that answer was exactly what he'd been hoping for. I like that. When the cafe staff started stacking chairs and wiping down tables, we realized it was getting late. "I guess we should go," Owen said, sounding almost disappointed. Yeah, I agreed, though I wasn't in a hurry to leave either. He stood up and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a neatly folded envelope. "Here," he said, handing it to me. "For your time." I took the envelope and slipped it into my bag. "Thank you." Owen hesitated, as if there was something else he wanted to say. Finally, he asked, "Can I walk you out?" "Sure," I said with a smile. We stepped outside, the rain now just a mist hanging in the air. The streetlights glowed softly in the damp night, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Owen shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and gave me a small, grateful smile. "Thanks for tonight," he said. "It really helped." "Me too," I said, and I'm in it. We stood there for a moment, the air thick with something unspoken but understood. Then, with a little wave, Owen turned and disappeared down the street, blending into the city like he'd been part of it all along. I watched him go, feeling something shift inside me, something small but important. It wasn't love or even friendship. It was just a quiet reminder that sometimes the simplest things, a conversation, a moment shared, can matter more than we realize. As I walked home through the misty streets, I felt lighter. Maybe Owen was right. Maybe we are all just stumbling into each other, hoping to find the connection we didn't know we needed. And maybe sometimes that's enough. I found out everything because of a stupid keychain. One of those cheap little souvenirs you pick up at the airport gift shop with a plastic palm tree dangling from it. It wasn't mine, and it definitely didn't belong to Mark, my boyfriend of 2.5 years. He hated clutter. His keyring only ever had 3 things: his apartment key, his car key, and the tiny metal bottle opener he got at a festival years ago. That's it. But one day, When I grabbed his keys from the kitchen counter to move his car, there it was, the palm tree. At first, I thought it was just something random, maybe a joke from a friend. But the more I looked at it, the more it felt wrong. It was out of place. I would have known if Mark had gone somewhere tropical. He never traveled without telling me. He always used to say, "What's the point of going somewhere cool if I can't go with you?" So, where did the keychain come from? When Mark got home that night, I asked him about it, trying to sound casual. "Hey, where'd you get this?" I dangled the keychain between my fingers. His reaction was subtle. Too subtle, almost like he had rehearsed it. "Oh, that?" he said with a shrug. "A coworker gave it to me. Some team-building thing." The explanation came too quickly, and the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes set off alarm bells in my head. Mark was usually honest to a fault. He hated lying, said it gave him migraines. But now, as he stood there, running a hand through his hair, I could tell he wasn't telling me the whole truth. I dropped the keychain onto the counter with a clatter, forcing a smile. "Weird gift," I said. He laughed, too loud for it to be genuine. "Yeah, weird." And that was it. He thought it was over. But it wasn't, because the seed of doubt had already been planted. The next few weeks were filled with little things, tiny shifts in his behavior that I probably wouldn't have noticed if it weren't for the keychain. He started staying late at work more often, always with a vague excuse about meetings that ran long. His phone, once left lying around without a second thought, was now glued to him, always face down on the table. He was still affectionate, still the Mark I knew in so many ways. But there was a distance between us, a gap I couldn't bridge no matter how hard I tried. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just a rough patch, that every relationship goes through ups and downs. But the keychain, it kept gnawing at me. And then one night, everything fell apart. It was a Friday evening, and Mark had told me he was working late again. I was curled up on the couch, half watching a movie, when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from Instagram. You might know, Lauren Clark. I didn't recognize the name at first, but something made me click on her profile. Her photos were filled with beaches, sunsets, and cocktails. Every shot more tropical than the last. And there, buried between vacation pictures, was a photo that made my stomach twist. It was Mark. He was standing on a beach, smiling, his arms slung casually around Lauren's shoulders. And dangling from her hand was the same palm tree keychain. The caption read, "Best trip ever. Can't wait to do it again." Palm tree red heart. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. The photo was recent, taken just 2 weeks ago, right around the time Mark had told me he was working late. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing tighter and tighter. My hands shook as I scrolled through her profile, finding more photos of the two of them. At a beach bar, on a boat, lying on the sand. He hadn't just lied. He'd built a whole separate life, one where I didn't exist. When Mark came home that night, I was still sitting on the couch, the photo open on my phone. He walked in, looking tired and a little disheveled, dropping his keys onto the counter like it was just another ordinary night. "Hey," he said, pulling off his jacket. "What's for dinner?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just held up my phone, the photo glowing on the screen. Mark froze. For a second, his expression was blank, like his brain hadn't caught up with what he was seeing. Then, slowly, the color drained from his face. "Ash, I can explain." I laughed, short, bitter, and sharp. "Really? I'd love to hear it." He stumbled over his words, trying to string together some excuse. "It wasn't what it looked like. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to get this far." I shook my head, anger bubbling up inside me. "Stop." My voice was steady, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Just stop." He opened his mouth again, but I held up a hand. "Do you know the worst part, Mark?" I asked, my voice cracking just slightly. "It's not that you cheated. It's that you let me sit here, day after day, thinking we were fine. You made me believe in us, while you were off, doing whatever this is." He looked down, shame written all over his face. "I never wanted to hurt you. That's the thing," I whispered. "You already did." I stood up, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me, but somehow I felt lighter, clearer. I had my answer, and I knew what I had to do. "I'm done," I said quietly. Mark's head snapped up, panic flashing in his eyes. "Ash, please. We can fix this. It was a mistake." No, I grabbed my bag from the chair, my heart pounding but resolute. You don't accidentally end up in someone else's vacation photos, Mark. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. He reached for me, but I stepped back. Don't. I warned. Just don't. I walked to the door, every step feeling like I was peeling away a part of my old life. When I reached the threshold, I turned back one last time. You know, I said softly, I actually liked that stupid keychain. And with that, I was gone. In the weeks that followed, Mark tried to reach out, calls, texts, even a letter, but I never responded. The truth is, once trust is broken, there's no putting it back together. Some people collect keychains, others collect lies, and I wasn't carrying his baggage anymore. For years now, I've told people I don't believe in marriage. It's become my go-to answer whenever the subject comes up, and it comes up more often than I'd like. Family gatherings, holidays, random conversations at work. Someone always finds a way to ask, so when are you two getting married? And every time I give them the same answer. Marriage just isn't for me. It's a lie. It always has been. The truth is, I've wanted to marry my partner, Jake, since the first year we were together. I can picture it perfectly. A small ceremony, nothing fancy. Just us, a few close friends, and some music playing softly in the background. I want the vows, the rings, the stupid cake we'd cut together. I want the feeling of waking up the next morning, knowing we'd made that promise to each other. I want all of it, but none of it is possible, and that's the part I've never told anyone. Jake has been stuck in a divorce battle for 7 years. When we first started dating, I didn't think much of it. It's just paperwork, he told me one night over drinks, waving it off like it was no big deal. His ex-wife had left him, but she was dragging the process out, using every trick in the book to make his life miserable. At first, I figured it was a temporary problem, a little legal red tape that would get sorted out in time. I thought, how long can it really take to sign some papers? But weeks turned into months, and months stretched into years, with no end in sight. I've seen the way it wears on Jake. Every time he talks to his lawyer, it leaves him drained and defeated, like someone took a piece of his soul and ran it through a shredder. His ex isn't asking for money. She just refuses to let go. It's a cruel game, and Jake is stuck playing it whether he wants to or not. We've tried everything. Every court date brings more delays, more excuses, more complications. We've reached the point where I don't even ask for updates anymore because I already know the answer. Nothing has changed. It's frustrating, but what's worse is the way I've had to live around it. The lie about not wanting marriage has become a wall between us and everyone else in our lives. At first, it was just a way to deflect awkward questions. But the longer it dragged on, the more the lie grew. Now, even my closest friends believe I've sworn off marriage completely. They think I'm just one of those people who isn't into weddings, someone who doesn't need a ring to feel committed. I've even gotten used to the jokes. You've got the perfect excuse. Now you'll never have to plan a wedding, they say, laughing. I smile along with them, but inside, it stings every time. The worst part is lying to my family. My mom brings it up at least once a year, always careful to sound casual. You sure you two don't want to make it official? She'll ask, folding laundry or chopping vegetables, pretending it's not a big deal. And every time, I lie to her face. We're happy as we are, I say, forcing a smile. I can tell she doesn't believe me, but she never presses the issue. She probably thinks it's Jake who doesn't want to get married, that I'm just going along with it to keep the peace. In a way, I wish that were true. At least then, the lie would feel less like a betrayal. But the biggest lie, the one that cuts the deepest, is the one I've told Jake. We don't talk about marriage much anymore, not since it became clear that his divorce was going nowhere. But there have been moments, quiet, stolen moments, where he's asked me if it bothers me. You know this isn't what I wanted, right? He'll say, lying next to me in bed, his voice barely above a whisper. And every time, I tell him it doesn't matter. We don't need a piece of paper to be happy. I whisper back, pretending the lump in my throat isn't there. I don't care about marriage. But I do. God, I care more than I've ever admitted, even to myself. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I imagine what our wedding would look like. I picture Jake standing at the altar, waiting for me, his hands fidgeting nervously the way they always do when he's excited. I imagine us saying I do, slipping rings onto each other's fingers, and dancing to something slow and sentimental at the reception. I imagine the speeches, the laughter, the promises we'd make in front of everyone we love. And every time, it breaks my heart just a little more. I know Jake feels guilty about it. He doesn't say it outright, but I can see it in the way his shoulders slump when he talks about the divorce. He thinks he's failing me somehow, that he's the reason I'll never get the wedding I've always wanted. But the truth is, I've never blamed him. Not once. This isn't his fault. It's just life, messy and unfair, throwing roadblocks in our way no matter how hard we try to move forward. A few months ago, I thought about telling him how much it really bothers me. I wanted to tell him everything. How I've spent years pretending not to care, how hard it's been to lie to everyone, how much it hurts to feel like our love isn't allowed to exist the way other people's love does. But in the end, I couldn't do it. What good would it do? He's already carrying so much. Burdening him with my frustration wouldn't change anything. It would only make him feel worse. So I stayed quiet, as I always do. Sometimes I wonder if this is just how life will be for us. A quiet, committed partnership without the ceremony or the title. Maybe we'll always be the couple who loves each other deeply, but never gets to say, I do. Maybe that's enough. But other times, the weight of it all feels unbearable. It's like carrying a secret that grows heavier with every passing year. A dream deferred until it starts to feel like a fantasy you'll never touch. I don't know how much longer I can keep lying to everyone, or to myself. But until Jake is free from his past, I have no other choice. So I'll keep telling people that marriage doesn't matter to me. I'll keep smiling at weddings, pretending I don't envy the couples exchanging vows. I'll keep making jokes about how marriage isn't my thing, hoping no one notices how tightly I'm holding onto the lie. And maybe one day, if the divorce ever comes through, I'll tell everyone the truth. I'll stand up in front of my family, my friends, and the man I love, and I'll say I lied. I'll tell them that marriage does matter to me, that it always has, and that I waited not because I didn't care, but because I cared more than they ever knew. And on that day, if it ever comes, I'll say the words I've been holding in for so long. I do. Until then, I'll carry this secret alone, like a quiet promise whispered in the dark, waiting, hoping, and loving him the best way I know how. I didn't wake up that morning thinking a squirrel would try to assassinate me. No one ever does, right? You expect squirrels to mind their own business. Maybe steal a bird feeder snack or two, but nothing life-threatening. That's what I thought too. Turns out I was very wrong. It started with a perfectly normal Saturday. I was sitting on my balcony, coffee in one hand, scrolling through my phone with the other. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and I was feeling pretty good about life. Then I saw it, the squirrel. At first, it was just a little gray puffball sitting on the railing, twitching its nose like it was deciding whether I was friend or foe. I gave it a polite nod like, hey there, little buddy. Just passing through? Cool. It seemed harmless enough, but something in its tiny black eyes gave me pause. This wasn't just any squirrel. This was a squirrel with an agenda. The thing about squirrels is they're sneaky. They lure you into a false sense of security by being all cute and twitchy. But this one? It had plans. I didn't know it yet, but that squirrel had decided today is the day. This is the fool I'm taking down. It started innocently enough. The squirrel ran along the railing, doing that little hop thing they do, and stopped right above me. I figured it was curious, just checking me out to see if I had snacks. I didn't. What I did have, though, was a full cup of coffee, and that, apparently, was enough to make me its mortal enemy. The squirrel stared down at me, unblinking, like a tiny, judgmental gargoyle. Then it stood up on its hind legs, wiggled its nose, and without any warning, jumped straight at my head. Time slowed down. I saw it coming, but my body didn't know how to react. Should I duck? Scream? Fight the squirrel midair? There was no time to decide. 1 second, I was minding my business, enjoying my morning brew. The next, a kamikaze squirrel was flying directly at my face. I panicked. My instincts took over, which was unfortunate because my instincts are terrible. Instead of dodging gracefully, I flailed like a broken windmill, knocking over my coffee in the process. Hot liquid splashed everywhere. On me, on the railing, and most importantly on the squirrel. The squirrel landed on my chest with the precision of a furry ninja and immediately freaked out. I guess scalding hot coffee wasn't part of its assassination plan. It scrambled across my shirt, claws scrabbling against the fabric, and let out this horrible, high-pitched screech that I swear could summon demons. At this point, I was in full-blown panic mode. I jumped up, arms flailing, trying to shake the squirrel off. It clung to me like it had declared this human is now my personal jungle gym. Every time I swatted at it, it dodged, scampering from one shoulder to the other with terrifying speed. I stumbled backward, tripped over the balcony chair, and went down hard, flat on my back, gasping like a fish out of water. And guess what? The squirrel stayed with me. It was like a furry backpack strapped to my chest, and it wasn't going anywhere. Get OFF! I shouted, rolling side to side, slapping at it like I was on fire. But the squirrel was determined to ruin my life. It scampered up to my neck, claws scratching my skin, and for one horrifying moment, I thought it was going for my throat. This was it. This was how I was going to die, murdered by a squirrel on my own balcony. The obituary would be humiliating. Local man, 32, tragically taken from us after failed coffee confrontation with squirrel. Survived by a confused landlord and a traumatized Starbucks barista. Finally, in a last-ditch effort to save myself, I rolled toward the railing and did the only thing I could think of. I shook my whole body like a wet dog. The squirrel, probably deciding I wasn't worth the hassle, launched itself off my chest and back onto the railing. It gave me one last look, as if to say, "You got lucky today, buddy. Next time, you're done." And then it vanished, just like that. Poof! Gone. I lay there for a few moments, sprawled out on the balcony, covered in coffee, breathing like I'd just run a marathon. My shirt was shredded, my neck was bleeding slightly, and my pride absolutely destroyed. When I finally sat up, I glanced around to make sure no one had seen the whole debacle. Thankfully, the neighbors were either still asleep or choosing to pretend they hadn't witnessed a full-grown man lose a battle with a squirrel. I limped back inside, grabbed a towel, and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. There were faint red scratches on my chest and neck, and I looked like I'd barely survived a fist fight, which technically wasn't far from the truth. Later, I told my friends what happened. Big mistake. Wait. My buddy Tom said, choking on laughter. You mean a squirrel attacked you? Like, an actual squirrel? Yes, Tom, I said through gritted teeth. An actual squirrel. And it almost killed me. They didn't stop laughing for 10 minutes. To this day, whenever we're out for coffee and a squirrel runs by, someone inevitably makes a joke. Careful, they say, nudging me. It might be one of your squirrels. I'll try to move past it. But every time I see one of those twitchy little creatures, my heart skips a beat. I swear they know. They remember. They're just waiting for me to drop my guard. So yeah, if anyone asks me why I get tense around squirrels, I just shrug and say, you wouldn't understand. Because once a squirrel tries to kill you, you're never the same. For the past year, I've been pretending that my boyfriend's mom is the greatest cook on earth. She's not. In fact, her food tastes like it's been seasoned with pure spite, but I've dug myself so deep into this lie that there's no escape. Every holiday, birthday, and Sunday dinner is a high-stakes game of culinary survival. And at this point, I deserve an award for how well I've faked it. It all started the first time I met her. My boyfriend was so nervous about the introduction, constantly reassuring me, "You'll love her." And her cooking? It's amazing. Wait until you try her lasagna. I wanted to make a good impression, so when she put a steaming plate in front of me, I smiled like I was being presented with the crown jewels. Then I took a bite. It was awful. The noodles were mushy, the sauce was watery, and the cheese situation was downright tragic. But everyone at the table looked so expectant, especially my boyfriend. So I forced a smile and said, "Wow, this is incredible." She beamed, clearly delighted, and I thought, okay, I'll get through this one meal. No harm done. Little did I know that one compliment would set the tone for the rest of my life. The next time I saw her, she made a giant pot of some sort of meat stew. It looked like a science experiment gone wrong. Chunks of unidentifiable meat floating in a sea of beige liquid. But before I could politely decline, my boyfriend piped up, She loved your cooking last time, Mom. Can't wait to see what she thinks of this. I was trapped. So, I took a spoonful, trying not to breathe through my nose, and said, "This is wow. So flavorful." His mom lit up like a Christmas tree. "I knew you had good taste," she said, ladling a second helping onto my plate. Since then, it's been one culinary horror after another. Her casseroles taste like regret. Her soups could double as paint thinner. And her idea of seasoning is apparently just salt, and lots of it. But somehow, I've kept the charade going. Every time she serves me something new, I plaster on a smile and say, delicious," while mentally preparing my stomach for battle. And it's not just at family dinners. She sends us home with care packages, Tupperware containers full of leftovers that my boyfriend insists we eat together. One time, she gave us an entire ham that tasted like it had been marinated in dish soap. I gagged my way through 2 slices before faking a stomachache. It's gotten to the point where my boyfriend brags to everyone about how much I love his mom's cooking. She's always asking for seconds, he'll say proudly. I have never asked for seconds. Not once. But now, every time we visit, his mom makes even more food, just for me. It's like she's trying to feed an army. Except the army is just me, desperately choking down lasagna and casseroles with the enthusiasm of someone on death row. The worst part is, she's planning to teach me her family recipes. "One day, you'll make these for your kids," she said, smiling warmly. I wanted to cry. I can't imagine subjecting innocent children to her version of spaghetti bolognese, which tastes like sadness in noodle form. But now I've hit a breaking point. She invited us to a family cook-off. It's a whole event where everyone makes their signature dish, and we're supposed to taste and rank each one. I am doomed. If I don't praise her dish, she'll know I've been lying this whole time. If I do praise it, she'll win the cook-off, and I'll have to eat even more of her food in the future. There is no good outcome. I've been trying to come up with an escape plan for days. Maybe I could fake a sudden allergy to, I don't know, everything, or accidentally forget to show up. But no, my boyfriend is so excited about this event that I can't back out. "It's going to be so fun," he said, kissing my cheek. "And I know you'll love my mom's dish. It's her best one yet." I am screwed. Part of me knows I need to tell him the truth. I can't live like this forever, dodging casseroles and choking down stew. But how do you break the news that his beloved mom is a culinary disaster? "Hey babe, just so you know, your mom's cooking tastes like burnt sadness, and I've been pretending to love it for over a year." Yeah, that'll go over well. So, for now, I'm sticking to my plan. Survive the cook-off, fake a mild cold if necessary, and hope no one asks me too many questions about flavor. And maybe, just maybe, I'll work up the courage to tell my boyfriend the truth before the next family dinner. Or maybe I'll just learn to love bland lasagna. After all, love is about compromise, right? And if that compromise involves eating an ungodly amount of casserole, so be it. Every senior class at our school tried to top the last one with an outrageous prank, and the bar was set pretty high. The year before us, some genius zip-tied all the desks in the science lab together, creating a giant desk monster that couldn't be moved through the door. The year before that, they filled the principal's office with balloons, floor to ceiling. So when our turn came around, Jake sat us down with a simple mission. "Gentlemen," he said, leaning forward with a gleam in his eye, "we aren't just going to do a prank. We're going to make history." That sentence should have been our first red flag, but Jake's ideas always sounded good when he explained them. "What's the plan?" Dave asked warily, because he knew better than to get excited too soon. Jake smirked. "We're going to move the principal's car." I blinked. "Like move it where?" Jake leaned back and grinned. "Onto the roof." The thing about Jake's ideas is that they're always impossible on paper, but somehow he convinces us to go along with them anyway. And this time, we didn't just need a good idea. We needed a miracle. Our principal, Mr. Haggerty, drove a tiny smart car, which was basically a go-kart with a windshield. It was small enough to make Jake's insane plan sound theoretically possible. Of course, the roof wasn't flat. It was slanted, and there was no logical way to get a car up there. But Jake was undeterred. "It's about the spirit of the prank," he explained confidently. "We don't have to make it work. We just have to try. That's how all bad ideas start." The night of the prank, Brian showed up with his van. The van that had already survived more disasters than I could count. Somehow, he managed to borrow a tow strap from his neighbor, who thought he needed it to move a couch. He wasn't technically wrong. We drove to the school parking lot just after midnight, under the cover of darkness. The building was dead silent except for a single flickering streetlight, casting a sad glow over Mr. Haggerty's little bright blue smart car, parked in its usual spot right by the front entrance. Jake clapped his hands. "All right, boys, let's make magic." Our first step was getting the car onto Brian's van. Simple, right? Wrong. The smart car was light, but it still took 4 of us grunting and sweating to lift it just a few inches. Every time we thought we had it, someone would lose their grip and the car would slam back onto the pavement with a loud thud that echoed across the parking lot. "We are so screwed," Dave groaned, wiping sweat off his forehead. "We're almost there," Jake whispered, trying to stay positive, even though it was clear we were way over our heads. After what felt like an eternity of struggling, we finally managed to tilt the front end of the car up onto the roof of Brian's van. Brian, naturally, was cracking open a Mountain Dew instead of helping. "This is going great," he said, which was a bold-faced lie. Now came the tricky part, getting the car onto the roof of the school. We had no plan, no blueprint, just vibes. Jake, looking around like a battlefield commander, decided we could use the maintenance ramp that led to the roof. It was one of those narrow metal ramps used to wheel air conditioning units onto the roof, but Jake figured if a bunch of kids and pure adrenaline were involved, we could somehow turn it into a car ramp. Spoiler alert, we could not. We tied the tow strap from the smart car to the back of Brian's van and started yanking it toward the ramp. For a brief, shining moment, it actually looked like the plan might work. The car's tiny wheels rolled smoothly across the lot. We laughed, high-fiving each other, convinced that we were pulling off the impossible. And then Brian hit the gas. "To the roof!" Jake screamed, holding on to the strap like he was a pirate commanding a ship. But instead of smoothly pulling the car up the ramp, the van jerked forward too fast, snapping the strap. The car rolled backward down the ramp at full speed, headed straight toward the school's front doors. "Oh shit!" Dave yelled, diving out of the way as the smart car careened out of control. The car slammed into a bush, narrowly avoiding the entrance. For a second, the world stood still, and all you could hear was the gentle hum of crickets and Brian slurping his Mountain Dew. "That," Jake whispered, "was awesome. We should have stopped there. We really should have." But Jake, never one to quit while he was ahead, decided we just needed one more big push. "Forget the roof," he said. "Let's park it inside the school." The logic? If we couldn't make it fly, we could at least get it through the front doors and into the main hallway. That was Jake's philosophy in a nutshell. If plan A fails catastrophically, just make plan B even dumber. Using the last bit of brain power we had left, we pried open the school's front doors and shoved the car inside. The tires squeaked against the linoleum as we wheeled it down the dark, empty hallway, giggling like idiots. Then, out of nowhere, the alarm went off. A loud, high-pitched siren echoed through the building. The lights flicked on, and we froze in place, staring at each other like deer caught in headlights. "That's probably not good," Dave whispered. "Abort," Jake hissed. "We gotta move. Go, go." We abandoned the car right there in the hallway and sprinted for the doors, slipping on the polished floor as the alarm blared in our ears. Brian was already in the van, honking the horn impatiently. Let's go," he yelled as we dove into the back. Brian floored it, tires screeching as we peeled out of the lot just as police sirens wailed in the distance. The next day at school was legendary. The whole building was buzzing with rumors. Somehow, the smart car was still sitting in the hallway when students arrived for first period. Mr. Haggerty had to call the fire department to come help move it. Nobody knew who did it, but everyone knew it was the greatest senior prank in years. Jake, he played dumb the whole day, sitting through class with a straight face while kids whispered about the phantom car prank like it was some kind of urban legend. We got away with it almost. A week later, Mr. Haggerty announced over the loudspeaker that all future senior pranks were officially banned. He never found out it was us, but we knew. And every time someone mentioned the car, Jake just smiled that smug, satisfied grin. Years later, people still ask, "Remember that time someone put a car in the school?" And Jake, he just shrugs and says, "Good times, man." And honestly, he's right. It's early evening, and I'm waiting at the crosswalk downtown, balancing a takeout coffee in one hand and an overstuffed bag in the other. The light seems to be taking forever, and I'm doing my best not to look completely exhausted from the day. The sky is already dimming into that golden hour glow, and people are bustling past, either on their way home or on their way to plans more exciting than mine. As I shift my weight from one foot to the other, a guy steps up beside me at the crosswalk. He's holding one of those rental scooters, the kind that always seem like a good idea until you realize how ridiculous they make you look. His helmet is dangling from the handlebars, and there's this slightly wind-blown look about him, like he's been zipping through the city with zero regrets about it. He glances at me, then at the endless stream of traffic, and with a grin he says, "How much you want to bet this light's broken? Feels like we've been standing here since the dawn of time." I can't help but smile. Honestly, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if we have to file for residency here. He chuckles, giving his scooter a little nudge. Well, if we do, dibs on the corner spot. Might as well make the most of it. It's such a silly, offhand comment, but the way he says it, like he's already decided we're co-conspirators against the absurdity of life, makes me laugh. And just like that, the weight of my long day lifts a little. The light still isn't changing, and a few people around us are starting to jaywalk, darting between cars like they've got somewhere way more important to be. Scooter guy watches them go, then tilts his head toward me. What do you think? We feeling brave? Or do we wait it out like law-abiding citizens? I glance down at my overstuffed bag, then at my precarious coffee, and sigh dramatically. Tempting, but knowing my luck, I'd trip in the middle of the street and spill this everywhere. He grins. High risk, low reward. Fair enough. A beat passes, and we both watch as the traffic keeps rolling by. He shifts the scooter slightly, balancing it with one hand, and says, "So, you look like someone who's got opinions. What's your take, scooters? Ridiculous or genius?" I raise an eyebrow. You want the polite answer or the honest one? "Oh, always the honest one," he says with a laugh. I can take it. I smirk. All right, ridiculous, but in a charming way. He presses a hand to his chest, pretending to be deeply wounded. Ouch, but fair. I'll accept charming as a consolation prize. The conversation flows so easily that I almost forget we're standing at a crosswalk, still waiting on the world's longest red light. There's something about the way he talks, like everything he says is just part of a long-running inside joke. It feels effortless, the kind of lighthearted connection you don't expect but immediately want to follow wherever it goes. Finally, the light changes, and the little walk signal flashes green. We both glance at it, almost surprised it decided to cooperate. "Well," he says, giving the scooter a playful kick. "Looks like our residency was short-lived." "Shame," I say, starting to step off the curb. I was really getting attached to that corner spot. He laughs, falling in a step beside me as we cross the street. "If it makes you feel better, I'll visit sometimes. Maybe bring a housewarming gift." I grin. "What, like traffic cones and sidewalk chalk?" "Obviously. Only the best for my fellow crosswalk survivor." We reach the other side of the street, and I figure this is where the conversation will end. Just a funny little moment with a stranger, a brief encounter lost to the flow of the evening. But then, instead of scooting off into the sunset, he pauses, tilting his head slightly, as if weighing his next words carefully. "Hey," he says, with that same easy grin. "This has been weirdly fun. If you ever want to grab a coffee sometime, one that doesn't involve dodging traffic, I'd be up for it." He pulls his phone from his jacket pocket, unlocking it with a swipe. "Here," he says, holding it out to me. "If you feel like it, throw your number in." There's no pressure in the offer, no weird expectations, just a casual suggestion, like it's totally fine whether I say yes or no. And that kind of confidence, the kind that doesn't hinge on the outcome, feels refreshing. I take his phone, typing in my name and number. "There," I say, handing it back. "Now you've got a fellow scooter critic on speed dial." He laughs, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Perfect. I'll make sure to bring my A game next time." He pulls on his helmet, gives me a playful salute, and hops onto the scooter. "All right, Jess. Until next time." And just like that, he zips away down the street, weaving smoothly between pedestrians with an ease that almost makes scooters look cool. Almost. I stand there for a moment, watching him disappear into the flow of the city, and I can't help but smile. It's rare to meet someone who can turn a random crosswalk encounter into something worth remembering. And yeah, I texted him, because anyone who can make you laugh at a broken streetlight is someone worth getting to know. The job came through with almost no warning. Client needs company for an event. Black tie. Be ready at 7 p.m. I was still in my pajamas, eating cereal at noon, when the text buzzed through. I almost said no. Fancy events aren't my thing, and I didn't own anything close to black tie. But the payout promised to be enough to carry me through rent and groceries for the month. So I borrowed a dress from a friend and told myself I could survive anything for one night. By 6:50 p.m., I was standing outside an old theater that had been converted into an event hall, clutching my tiny borrowed purse and hoping I didn't look as out of place as I felt. The client said he'd meet me inside, which meant I had to walk through the grand entrance alone, surrounded by beautiful people who all looked like they belonged. I didn't. My heels were too high, the hem of the dress felt a little too short, and the glitzy atmosphere was giving me a mild identity crisis. I made my way through the lobby, trying not to look like I was casing the place. Then I saw him, standing near the bar, hands tucked into his pockets, looking like he was already halfway through regretting his decision to be there. He was tall, mid-40s, wearing a sleek black tux with just the right amount of rumple to make it seem like he didn't care. When our eyes met, he gave me a small, almost apologetic smile. "You must be Jade," he said as I approached. At this point, it feels weird if people don't call me Jade. "That's me," I said, offering my most professional smile. "You must be." "Call me Luke," he said, then added, "Thanks for coming on such short notice." "No problem." I glanced around the glittering crowd. "So, what kind of event are we crashing?" Luke chuckled softly. "Charity auction. My company's one of the sponsors, so they expect me to show up and look presentable." "Ah," I said, nodding. "And you needed someone to keep you sane?" "Exactly." He gave me a grateful smile, the kind that hinted this was more of a lifeline than a luxury. We found a small table tucked near the back of the room, away from the center of attention. Luke ordered 2 glasses of champagne, handed me one, and gave a small toast to surviving the evening. I clinked my glass against his. "I'll drink to that." For the first 30 minutes, it was mostly small talk, work, the auction items on display, the ridiculousness of black tie events. Luke had a dry, understated sense of humor that I liked. He wasn't flashy or arrogant, just tired in a way that felt familiar. Like someone who'd spent too many years being the guy people counted on and was now wondering when it would be his turn to exhale. "I hate these things," he admitted at one point, glancing around the room. "Everyone pretending they care about the cause when they're really just here to show off." I followed his gaze and saw exactly what he meant. Designer gowns, forced smiles, people talking over each other about vacations and investments. The whole room buzzed with that peculiar, exhausting energy that only comes from people trying too hard. "So why come at all?" I asked. Luke shrugged, taking a sip of his champagne. "Expectations, obligations, that sort of thing." "Ah," I said knowingly. "The old pretend you care game." He smiled at that. "Exactly." As the evening wore on, the auction began. Art pieces, vacation packages, rare bottles of wine. All sold off to the highest bidder while the crowd clapped politely. Luke leaned closer to me, his voice low. "You ever feel like everyone's in on some secret, and you're just not?" I glanced at him. "Every day." He smiled, a small, tired smile that felt more honest than anything else in the room. "Glad I'm not the only one." When the auctioneer announced the next item, a private yacht tour of the Mediterranean, Luke rolled his eyes. "Jesus, imagine needing that much luxury just to have a good time." "Some people really hate public ferries," I said, and to my delight, Luke actually laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that seemed to surprise even him. For a moment, the room around us seemed to fade, leaving just the two of us sitting in the corner, drinking champagne and finding humor in the absurdity of it all. After the auction ended, the crowd began to thin out, drifting toward the exit or the open bar. Luke leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, like the worst part of the evening was finally over. "Thanks for sticking this out with me," he said, his voice softer now. "I know this probably wasn't what you signed up for." I shook my head. Honestly, this is one of the better gigs I've had. He gave me a curious look. Yeah, I said, smiling. No tears, no awkward silences, and no drunk clients playing breakup songs on repeat. I'd call that a win. Luke chuckled, shaking his head. That's oddly specific. You'd be surprised. We lingered for a little while longer, neither of us in a rush to leave. It felt nice, easy, like we were two people who'd stumbled into each other at just the right moment, without needing it to mean anything more than that. When the night finally came to an end, Luke stood up and offered me his arm. "Shall we?" I looped my arm through his, grateful that my heels hadn't betrayed me yet. We made our way to the exit, stepping out into the cool night air. The streets were quiet, the city lights flickering gently in the distance. Luke turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "I wasn't sure what to expect tonight," he said, "but I'm glad it was you." "Me too," I said, meaning it more than I expected to. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to me with a look that was more grateful than transactional. "For your time." I took it, tucking it into my borrowed purse. "Thank you." For a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of the night hanging between us, not heavy, just present. Then Luke gave me a small, tired smile. "Take care, Jade." "You too, Luke," I said softly. He lingered for a second longer, as if there was more he wanted to say, but in the end, he just gave me a little nod and walked away, disappearing into the night like a ghost slipping back into the world. As I stood there, watching him go, I felt something shift inside me, a strange sense of calm, like I just shared something important with someone, even if neither of us could quite name what it was. The night hadn't gone the way I expected, but maybe that's the point. Maybe the best moments are the ones that sneak up on you, the ones that don't come with grand gestures or perfect timing. Just quiet, unexpected connections that remind you, for a little while, that you're not alone. And as I walked home, heels clicking softly against the pavement, I realized something. Maybe that's all we really need. Just someone to sit with us, drink champagne, and remind us that it's okay to not have everything figured out. And for tonight, that was more than enough. When I was in college, I rented a small apartment on the second floor of an old, rundown building just off campus. It wasn't much, but it was cheap, and I liked the fact that it had big windows that let in lots of natural light. The only thing I hated was the bathroom mirror. It was one of those tall, narrow mirrors bolted to the wall above the sink. It had this strange, antique look to it, tarnished around the edges, with tiny black spots scattered across the glass. But what really bugged me was how off the reflection always looked. Something about it was just wrong, like the proportions were ever so slightly distorted, making me look almost like a version of myself that didn't belong to me. I told myself it was just an old mirror, nothing to be creeped out about. But from the very first night I moved in, I made a habit of not looking at it too closely, especially at night. One evening, after a long day of classes, I was brushing my teeth before bed. The bathroom was small, so I had to lean forward to spit into the sink, bringing my face just inches from the mirror. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something strange. My reflection didn't seem to move at the same time I did. I straightened up slowly, staring into the mirror, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. My reflection stared back, but there was something wrong with the way it held its expression. Too stiff, too unnatural. I shook my head and turned off the bathroom light, forcing myself to laugh it off. I figured I was just overtired, my mind playing tricks on me after a long day. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. You know how sometimes you wake up for no reason, like something pulled you out of a deep sleep? That's what it felt like. I lay there for a moment, my heart pounding in the dark, trying to figure out what had woken me. And then I heard it, a soft, tapping sound. It was coming from the bathroom. I sat up, straining to listen, every hair on my body standing on end. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow, deliberate, like someone gently knocking on a surface. For a moment, I thought it might be coming from the sink, maybe a leaky faucet dripping onto the porcelain. But as I listened closer, I realized the sound wasn't coming from the sink. It was coming from the mirror. My heart stopped. I told myself it wasn't possible. It had to be the pipes, or maybe the old building settling. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me behind that bathroom door. The tapping continued, soft, rhythmic, relentless. I wanted to ignore it, to curl back under the blanket and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But something compelled me to get up, like some invisible force was daring me to look. My legs felt like jelly as I swung them off the bed and crept toward the bathroom, the wooden floorboards groaning softly beneath my feet. I stood in front of the closed bathroom door, my heart hammering against my ribs. The tapping had stopped. For a moment, there was only silence, thick and heavy, like the air was pressing down on me. Then, slowly, I reached out and pushed the door open. The bathroom was pitch dark. I fumbled for the light switch and flipped it on. The light flickered for a second before humming to life, casting a dull, yellow glow over the tiny room. Everything looked normal. The mirror hung on the wall above the sink, just as it always had. There was nothing unusual about it. No cracks, no fingerprints on the glass. But as I stared at my reflection, a chill ran down my spine. My reflection wasn't quite right. It stood perfectly still, just like me, but the expression on its face wasn't mine. It was almost mine, but not quite. The corners of its mouth were tilted up, just a little too far, into the faintest suggestion of a smile. I wasn't smiling. My breath hitched, and I took a step back from the mirror. My reflection stayed where it was, still smiling that strange, almost imperceptible smile. Then very slowly it tilted its head to the side. I didn't move. I stood there, frozen in place, as my reflection, my other self, continued to tilt its head just a little too far until it looked like the bones in its neck should snap. And then it blinked. I screamed, slamming the bathroom door shut so hard the walls shook. I stumbled back into my room, my heart racing, and crawled under the blanket, too terrified to move. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I had been half asleep, dreaming with my eyes open. But when I went back into the bathroom, I couldn't bring myself to look at the mirror again. I covered it with an old towel and told myself I'd deal with it later. But that night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard the tapping again. Tap, tap, tap. I lay perfectly still, my pulse thundering in my ears. The tapping wasn't coming from the bathroom this time. It was coming from the mirror, the one behind the towel. And then, through the thin fabric, I heard something else, a soft, muffled whisper, just barely audible. Let me out. I left that apartment the next morning. Didn't even bother packing. Just grabbed my keys, locked the door, and never went back. I don't know what was in that mirror, and I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I swear I can still hear it. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't the lipstick stain or a forgotten text message that gave him away. It was a phone charger. A small, ordinary thing, but it changed everything. We were at his place, a typical lazy Sunday. Matt had just made us pancakes, and we were lounging on the couch, binge-watching something neither of us really cared about. I reached for my phone, only to see it was at 3%. Hey, can I borrow your charger? I asked, already half rolling off the couch. He froze for a split second, a hesitation so brief, I almost missed it. Yeah, sure, he said a little too casually. It's on the nightstand. I didn't think much of it. I padded into the bedroom, still wrapped in a blanket, expecting to grab his usual black charger. But what I found wasn't his charger at all. It was pink, a cheap, glittery, obviously not his kind of thing pink. I stared at it for a moment, my brain trying to make sense of it. Matt wasn't the type to buy quirky things. His whole life was beige and black. Plain hoodies, plain furniture, plain everything. There was no way that charger belonged to him. And it definitely wasn't mine. A knot twisted in my stomach, tight and unforgiving. My brain immediately tried to come up with logical explanations. Maybe it was his sister's. Maybe a friend left it behind. But deep down, I knew. I walked back into the living room, the pink charger clutched in my hand like evidence. Whose is this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Matt barely glanced up from his phone. Huh? Oh, that. It's probably Kelly's. She came over last week, remember? I blinked. Your coworker, Kelly? He nodded, too quickly. Yeah, she needed a charger phone. No big deal. But it was a big deal. Kelly had never come over before. In fact, as far as I knew, their relationship was strictly professional. And yet here was her charger, sitting by his bed, as if it belonged there. I didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at him, waiting for the truth to crawl out of the cracks. But he didn't look up. He just kept scrolling through his phone like the charger in my hand was invisible. That was the moment I knew. The anger hit me in waves, crashing hard and fast. I wanted to yell, to throw the charger at him, to demand an explanation for every late night and vague excuse he'd ever given me. But instead, I sat down on the edge of the couch, the pink charger heavy in my hands. "Why didn't you tell me she came over?" He sighed, finally putting down his phone. "Ash, it wasn't a big deal. She just needed help with something at work, that's all." "At your apartment?" "In your bedroom." Matt rubbed the back of his neck, a telltale sign that he was lying. "It wasn't like that," he said quickly. "I didn't think it was important enough to mention." I laughed, short, bitter, and sharp. "Right? Because it's just so normal for your coworkers to leave their things next to your bed." He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. And that silence? That told me everything. I stood up, the pink charger still in my hand. "How long?" I asked quietly. Matt's expression shifted. Panic, guilt, regret. "Ash, please." "How long, Matt?" He hesitated, and that hesitation shattered what little hope I had left. "A few months," he admitted finally, "but it didn't mean anything. I swear." I laughed again, this time with tears stinging my eyes. "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "It meant enough for you to lie, enough for you to let her into your life and your bed while I was sitting here, thinking we were okay." He stood up, reaching for me, but I stepped back. "Ash, please, let me explain." "No," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I'm done." The room felt too small, the air too thick. I grabbed my bag, slinging it over my shoulder, my hands shaking with the weight of everything I hadn't said. Matt followed me to the door, panic flashing in his eyes. "Don't do this," he begged. "We can fix this. I'll tell her it's over. I'll do whatever you want." I turned to face him, the pink charger still clutched in my fist. "You already made your choice, Matt. This." I held up the charger. "This is the only explanation I need." He opened his mouth, desperate to say something, anything, but I was already walking out the door. I made it to my car before the tears started. I sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The betrayal hit me in waves, sharp and unforgiving, like salt rubbed into a wound. I wanted to scream, to cry, to drive back up there and demand answers. But what would be the point? I had my answer, and it came in the form of a pink, glittery phone charger. In the days that followed, Matt tried everything: texts, calls, voicemails. He swore it was over, that it had been a stupid mistake, that he loved me and wanted to make things right. But love doesn't leave phone chargers next to someone else's bed. Love doesn't lie for months and then call it nothing. So I blocked his number, deleted his photos, erased every trace of him from my life, bit by bit, until there was nothing left but the memories, and even those started to fade. One day, I found the pink charger in the bottom of my bag. I stared at it for a moment, turning it over in my hands. Then I tossed it in the trash, along with everything else that reminded me of him. Because I wasn't going to carry his lies anymore. Some things, and some people, are just better left behind. This is the kind of story that makes your palms sweat just thinking about it. To this day, I can't believe it happened. And every time someone brings up that summer, I have to fight the urge to change the subject or fake a bathroom emergency. But hey, if you want one last disaster, here it is, the one where I hooked up with my best friend's aunt. Yeah, his aunt. It started with an invitation I never should have accepted. My buddy, Tyler, invited me to join his family on their summer vacation at a beach house. It sounded harmless enough, a week of sun, sand, and cold drinks on the coast. Tyler's family was big, laid back, and easy to get along with. I'd met most of them before at BBQs and birthday parties, so it didn't feel weird. Plus, a free beach vacation? Who was I to say no? The one person I hadn't met yet was Aunt Melissa, and if I'd known what I was walking into, I would have faked a conflict and stayed far, far away. Melissa wasn't like the other moms and aunts I'd grown up around. She wasn't rocking sensible shoes and tote bags. Oh no, She was the kind of woman who looked more like she belonged at a yacht club than a family cookout. Late 30s, tan, blonde, and ridiculously fit. She had that "I do Pilates 5 times a week and get hit on everywhere I go" vibe. The kind of energy that turns heads the moment she walks into a room. I remember the first time I saw her that week. She showed up at the beach house in this flowy sundress and oversized sunglasses, carrying a bottle of rose like she was hosting her own personal vacation. "You must be Tyler's friend," she said, giving me a once-over with a smile that instantly made me nervous. "That's me," I said awkwardly, trying not to look directly at her like I was staring into the sun. Melissa grinned. "Cute." And with that, she floated past me into the kitchen like a queen entering her castle. That's when I knew I was in trouble. For the first couple of days, everything stayed relatively normal. We spent our time lounging on the beach, grilling burgers, and getting sunburned, classic summer vacation stuff. Melissa mostly kept to herself, sipping wine by the pool or scrolling through her phone on the deck. But every now and then, I'd catch her watching me, her smile lingering just a little too long. Tyler was oblivious, of course. He spent most of his time surfing or flirting with some girl he met at the boardwalk. Meanwhile, I was trying and failing to act like I didn't notice Melissa's not-so-subtle attention. I kept telling myself, it's just a crush. She's bored. She's flirting for fun. It doesn't mean anything. But things came to a head on the 4th night, when the whole family decided to call it an early night after too many margaritas. Tyler crashed hard after spending all day in the water, leaving me alone on the deck with Melissa. She poured herself another glass of wine and offered me one too. "Come on," she said with a playful smile. "It's vacation. Live a little." I should have gone to bed right then. I should have made some lame excuse about being tired and escaped while I still could. But instead, I sat down across from her and accepted the wine, thinking, what's the harm? It's just a drink. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just a drink. The conversation started out harmless, small talk about the beach, vacation plans, and how I knew Tyler. But as the wine disappeared, the conversation drifted into more dangerous territory. "You know," Melissa said, swirling her glass, "it's nice having someone around who isn't family. You're refreshing." I laughed awkwardly, glad I could help. She gave me that smile again, the one that made my brain short-circuit. "You know, you're cuter than Tyler let on." Every internal alarm bell was going off. Abort mission. Go to bed. But the wine was kicking in, and part of me, a big part, liked the attention. "You're not so bad yourself," I heard myself say, immediately regretting it. Melissa tilted her head, like she'd just won some unspoken game. "You're sweet." And then, before I could even process what was happening, she leaned in and kissed me. In that moment, time stood still. I knew this was the dumbest thing I'd ever done, but I kissed her back anyway. Every rational thought evaporated the second her hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer. It was thrilling, forbidden, and wildly inappropriate, but I couldn't stop. We stumbled into the guest room like a pair of teenagers sneaking around behind their parents' backs. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching myself make one terrible decision after another from outside my own body. We hooked up, and the whole time, my brain kept screaming, "What the hell are you doing? This is Tyler's aunt. This is Tyler's aunt." But it was too late to stop. The damage was already done. The next morning was pure panic. I woke up to the sound of Tyler moving around the house, talking loudly with his parents. Melissa was still asleep beside me, her hair a tangled mess on the pillow. I bolted upright, heart racing, trying to figure out how to get out of there without anyone noticing. Melissa stirred, giving me a sleepy smile. "Sneaking out already?" Yeah, I stammered, pulling on my clothes like the room was on fire. She just laughed, completely unbothered. "Relax. It's our little secret." That did not make me feel better. The rest of the vacation was a nightmare. Every time I saw Tyler, I felt like I was going to puke from guilt. Melissa acted totally normal, like nothing had happened, which somehow made everything worse. She'd give me these sly little smiles whenever no one else was looking, like we were in on some big joke together. I couldn't stand it. When the vacation finally ended, I swore to myself that I'd never speak of it again. Tyler didn't suspect a thing, thank God, and I intended to keep it that way. But of course, secrets like that never stay buried for long. About a month after we got back, Tyler called me, sounding confused. Hey, I just had the weirdest conversation with my aunt. She, mentioned you. My heart stopped. What do you mean? She said you guys hit it off on the trip, Tyler said slowly. Like, weirdly hit it off. I could hear the suspicion creeping into his voice, and I knew I had two options. Lie, or come clean and let the fallout destroy everything. I went with option A. Nah, man, I said, forcing a laugh. She's just messing with you. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Yeah, okay, Tyler said finally, though I could tell he wasn't convinced. To this day, I don't know if he ever figured out the truth. But every time I see him, I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to collapse beneath me. It was late, probably around 1:30 in the morning, when my phone rang. I was lying in bed, halfway between sleep and wakefulness, the kind of tired where your body feels heavy and every sound feels distant. The screen lit up beside me, casting an eerie blue glow across the room. I squinted at the name on the display, and my heart skipped a beat. It was my mom's number. Here's the thing, my mom had passed away 6 months ago. I stared at the screen, too stunned to move. The name, Mom, flashed across the display, over and over, as the ringtone echoed through the quiet room. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Maybe someone had spoofed her number, or it was some sort of weird glitch. But deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. My hand trembled as I reached for the phone. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the answer button, my pulse thudding in my ears. I knew I shouldn't answer. Every instinct screamed at me to let it go to voicemail. But I couldn't. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. Hello? At first, there was nothing, just a faint crackle of static like a far-off radio signal. I held my breath, waiting, listening. Then I heard it, a faint, familiar voice. My mom's voice. Sweetheart. The word was soft, distant, almost drowned out by the static. But it was unmistakably her. Can you hear me? My throat closed up. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. It was her voice, exactly how I remembered it. Gentle and warm, with that same comforting lilt she always used when she called me sweetheart. Mom! I whispered, clutching the phone, so tightly my knuckles turned white. Is that you? The line crackled again, and for a moment, I thought I'd lost the connection. Then her voice came through, clearer this time. I've been trying to reach you. Tears welled in my eyes, and my breath hitched in my throat. My mind was spinning, torn between disbelief and desperate hope. How are you calling me? I whispered, my voice shaking. Her answer sent chills down my spine. I don't have much time. The static grew louder, almost drowning her out. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, desperate to hear her. Mom, where are you? There was a long, crackling pause. Then, in a soft, distant whisper, not where I should be. My skin prickled with cold dread. The warmth I'd felt just moments before twisted into something darker, heavier, like a weight pressing on my chest. What do you mean? I asked, panic creeping into my voice. You have to listen to me, she said, her voice fading in and out. You're not alone. My heart stopped. I sat bolt upright in bed, scanning the dark room around me, my pulse racing. The shadows felt thicker, the silence heavier. Every instinct told me to turn on the light, to get out of the room, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, the phone pressed tight against my ear. Mom, what do you mean? What's happening? The line went dead for a moment, just static crackling and hissing. And then she said something that made my blood run cold. It's already in the house. I stopped breathing. Every muscle in my body locked up as I listened, heart pounding so loud it felt like it was rattling my ribs. My eyes darted around the room, searching the shadows for movement. Don't let it know you see it, she whispered, barely audible over the crackling static. It's watching you right now. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I fought the overwhelming urge to look around the room. I gripped the phone tighter, my breath shallow and rapid. Where? I whispered, too terrified to speak louder. Behind you, she said. I couldn't move. My hands trembled, and I felt the weight of something unseen pressing down on me, the darkness closing in around the edges of my vision. My skin prickled with the awful sensation of being watched. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart hammering in my chest. I could feel it, something standing behind me, just inches away. My whole body screamed to run, to turn around, to do anything. But I stayed frozen, paralyzed by fear. The phone crackled again, her voice faint and far away. "Don't turn around, sweetheart. Whatever you do, don't look." Tears streamed down my face as I sat there, clutching the phone like a lifeline, too terrified to move or breathe. I could feel the presence behind me now, cold, looming, radiating a kind of wrongness that made my skin crawl. "Mom, what do I do?" I whispered, my voice cracking with fear. Her answer was barely audible, almost lost beneath the static. "Wait," she whispered. "It will leave if you don't move." The seconds dragged on like hours. I stayed perfectly still, every muscle in my body aching from the effort. The room felt colder, the air heavier. I could hear it now, soft, slow breaths just behind me. Whatever it was close enough that I could feel the shift in the air every time it exhaled. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the presence faded. The room warmed. The air felt lighter. The shadows seemed less menacing. I let out a shaky breath, my whole body trembling with relief. I pressed the phone back to my ear, desperate to hear my mother's voice one last time. "Mom," I whispered, but the line was dead. No static, no voice, just silence. I sat there for a long time, too scared to move, too scared to believe it was really gone. Eventually, the sky outside my window began to lighten, and the first rays of morning crept into the room. I never told anyone about the call. Who would believe me? A phone call from a dead woman, warning me about something that had been inside my house? It sounded insane, but I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows grow long, I swear I can still feel it, standing just behind me, waiting. It all started with a batch of store-bought cookies. Not even fancy ones, just those break-apart cookie dough squares from the grocery store. The kind you throw in the oven for 12 minutes and bam, perfect cookies with minimal effort. I baked them one night on a whim, mostly because I was bored and wanted something sweet. They came out great, so I brought a few to work the next day to share with my coworkers. That's where things spiraled out of control. Everyone loved them. I mean, really loved them. "Oh my God, these are amazing," my boss said, munching on her second one. "Did you make these from scratch?" Now, the reasonable thing to do would have been to say, "Nah, it's just pre-made dough, nothing special." But instead, without thinking, I smiled and said, "Yeah, I've been experimenting with new recipes." I thought it was harmless at the time, a little white lie to make people think I had some cool hidden skill. I didn't expect it to turn into a big deal. But word spread fast. Before I knew it, people were treating me like some kind of baking prodigy. "You have to bring more cookies," one coworker begged. Someone even started calling me the Cookie Whisperer. At first, it was kind of flattering. I mean, who doesn't love being good at something, even if it's something you're not actually good at? So I leaned into it. Every couple of weeks, I'd show up with a new batch of cookies, carefully selected from the store's refrigerated aisle. Chocolate chip, oatmeal raisin, peanut butter blossoms, you name it, I baked it. I'd throw them in the oven the night before work, slap them into a cute little Tupperware container, and let people assume they were homemade. And honestly, it felt good. It was nice being the person everyone looked forward to seeing. But things escalated quickly. Someone asked me for my recipe. I panicked and said it was an old family secret. That only made people more curious. Suddenly, my cookies weren't just cookies. They were legendary. People started requesting them for birthdays and office events. "Can you make those snickerdoodles for my kid's party?" my boss asked one day. "I'll pay you." And that's when I knew I was in too deep. I couldn't back out now. Not without exposing the truth. That the beloved cookies everyone adored were, in fact, Pillsbury imposters. But with every passing week, the pressure grew. People started asking for more elaborate desserts. "You ever make macarons?" someone asked. "What about homemade bread?" I laughed it off, pretending I was just too busy to branch out, but inside, I was panicking. I had accidentally built an entire reputation on a lie, and I had no idea how to keep it up. Then, the final straw, my boss asked if I'd bake cookies for the company's annual holiday party. "You're basically our resident baker," she said with a grin. "It wouldn't be the same without your cookies." Everyone around the table nodded, chiming in about how they couldn't wait. I smiled weakly, pretending I wasn't screaming internally. How was I supposed to bake enough cookies for 50 people without anyone realizing I was a fraud? I couldn't just show up with 3 trays of break-and-bake dough. It would be too obvious. I knew I was running out of time. Either I had to learn how to bake for real, or I had to confess the truth and deal with the fallout. For a moment, I considered coming clean. I imagined gathering my co-workers and saying, "Look, I've been lying about the cookies. They're not homemade. They're from the grocery store." But every time I tried to picture that conversation, all I could see were their disappointed faces. The thought of them losing that little bit of joy, however fake, was too much. So I made a decision. I was going to learn how to bake. For real. I spent the next 2 weeks in a frenzy, scouring YouTube for cookie tutorials, Googling baking tips, and experimenting with recipes late into the night. My first few batches were disasters, flat, burnt, and bitter. I nearly gave up after one particularly horrific attempt that resulted in rock-hard cookies I couldn't even bite through. But with every failed batch, I got a little better, a little closer to the real thing. The night before the holiday party, I pulled an all-nighter in the kitchen, baking tray after tray of cookies. Flour covered every surface, and the apartment smelled like a sugar bomb had gone off. But by 3 a.m., I finally had something decent. Real, homemade cookies. Were they perfect? No, but they were good enough. The next day, I carried my trays of cookies into the office, heart pounding in my chest. As people started digging in, I held my breath, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to say, "Hey, these taste different." But instead, all I heard were the usual compliments. "These are amazing. You've outdone yourself." Someone even said, "I don't know how you do it every time." And that's when it hit me. I hadn't just fooled them. I'd fooled myself. Somewhere between the first lie and that final batch of cookies, I had become the baker everyone thought I was. It wasn't a lie anymore. I had earned it, one burnt batch at a time. I still don't know if I'll ever tell them the full story. Maybe one day I'll admit that my famous cookies started as a grocery store hack. Or maybe I won't. Maybe some secrets are best left in the past, baked into the dough like a pinch of salt. What I do know is this. The next time someone asks for a batch of cookies, I won't need to panic. I'll smile, roll up my sleeves, and say, "Of course, I'll bake them tonight. And this time, it won't be a lie." Look, I don't have a spider phobia. Let's get that straight. I'm not one of those people who screams bloody murder at the sight of a little daddy longlegs. But there's a line between coexisting with spiders and waking up to find one in your space. And when they cross that line, it's war. This particular incident happened late one night when I was winding down after a long day. I was lying in bed, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, the glow of the screen the only light in the room. Everything was quiet, peaceful even. And then, it appeared. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move across the ceiling just above my bed. I turned my head, and there it was, the biggest spider I've ever seen in my life. I'm not talking about some dainty little house spider. No! This thing was practically a dinner plate with legs. We locked eyes, or at least I imagined we did. And at that moment, I knew one of us wasn't making it through the night. Now, normally, I would have grabbed a tissue, squished the spider, and gone back to bed. But this monster? Tissue paper wasn't going to cut it. I needed a game plan. I carefully slid out of bed, trying not to startle it. As if that mattered, like it could sense my fear and was biding its time. My brain started going into overdrive. I need to kill it, but if I miss, it's going to fall on my bed. And then, well, I'm moving out. I scanned the room for weapons. Shoes? Too bulky. A magazine? Too flimsy. Then my eyes landed on an old Tupperware container sitting on my dresser. Perfect. I'd trap it, slide some paper underneath, and toss it outside. Easy, right? Big mistake. I grabbed the Tupperware and crept closer, keeping my eyes locked on the spider. It hadn't moved yet, but I knew these things were fast. If I hesitated, it would bolt, and then I'd be sleeping in the car tonight. No way was I going to bed knowing that thing was lurking somewhere unseen. With the Tupperware clutched in one hand and a piece of junk mail in the other, I took a deep breath. Okay, one swift move, trap it, scoop it, done. I reached up, aiming the container over the spider. And then it happened. The spider jumped. I have never in my life seen anything move so fast. 1 second it was on the ceiling, and the next it was free falling directly toward my face. I let out a sound that can only be described as the scream of someone who has seen the end and knows it's coming. My survival instincts kicked in, sort of. Instead of handling the situation like an adult, I flailed backward, tripped over the corner of my bed, and went down hard. My elbow hit the nightstand, knocking over a lamp, my phone, and a glass of water, which immediately soaked everything. Meanwhile, the spider? Nowhere to be seen. I lay there on the floor, tangled in a mess of sheets and regret, gasping for breath. My heart was racing so fast I could feel it in my throat. For a moment, I just lay still, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the spider had disappeared into the void, never to be seen again. Then I felt it. Something tickled the back of my neck. Something tiny, fast, and very much alive. Oh, hell no! I bellowed, slapping at my neck like I was on fire. I jumped to my feet, spinning in circles, trying to brush the invisible terror off me. In my panic, I managed to slam my shin into the corner of the bed, which sent me sprawling to the ground again, this time with a loud crash. By now, I was in full meltdown mode. My heart was pounding out of my chest, my shin throbbed, and I was pretty sure I was going to die from sheer embarrassment, even if no one was around to witness my downfall. The spider, as if sensing my utter defeat, scuttled across the floor and vanished under the dresser. And that was it. Game over. I had lost. I stood there, panting, soaked, and humiliated, staring at the dark space beneath the dresser. I knew, deep down, that I wasn't going to sleep that night, not while it was still in the room. In a last-ditch effort to reclaim some dignity, I grabbed a towel, stuffed it under the door to block the spider from escaping, and climbed back into bed, keeping all the lights on, of course. I didn't sleep a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined those creepy little legs crawling up the side of the bed, waiting for the perfect moment to finish what it had started. The next morning, my roommate found me huddled in a blanket, wild-eyed and twitchy, like a soldier just back from the front lines. "Rough night?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Spider," I muttered. "Big one." She nodded sympathetically. "Did you kill it?" I shook my head. "No, it's still out there." She stared at me for a moment, then burst out laughing. "So you fought a spider and lost?" "Yes," I said flatly, "and I'll probably never recover." To this day, every time I see a spider, my heart skips a beat. It's not that I'm afraid. Okay, maybe I'm a little afraid, but it's more than that. It's the knowledge that spiders are always watching, waiting for their moment to strike. And if anyone ever asks me why I get weirdly tense around bugs, I just smile and say, you wouldn't understand. Because once a spider tries to kill you, you're never the same. For the last year, my entire life has been a performance, and not the good kind. I've been pretending to love fitness. My boyfriend is a gym rat, the kind of guy who thinks rest days are for the weak and owns more protein powder than actual food. He wakes up at 5 a.m. to run before work, drinks smoothies with things like spirulina, and talks about his macros like it's a religion. And somehow, I've convinced him that I'm right there with him. The truth? I hate working out. I hate sweating. I think yoga is torture disguised as wellness. And the only cardio I truly enjoy is walking to the fridge. But on our second date, when he casually asked, "So, are you into fitness?" I panicked and said, "Oh yeah, big time." And just like that, I was trapped. At first, I thought I could fake it. I mean, how hard could it be to seem fit? I bought some cute leggings, followed a couple of fitness influencers on Instagram, and downloaded a running app that I fully intended to never open. I figured I could get away with talking vaguely about endurance and core strength while avoiding any actual exercise. Then he invited me to his gym. It was a CrossFit gym, the kind with giant tires, battle ropes, and people grunting like they're lifting small cars. I nearly fainted just walking in the door. But there he was, beaming with pride, introducing me to the trainer. "This is my girlfriend," he said. "She's really into fitness too." The trainer smiled warmly and asked, "What's your favorite kind of workout?" I froze. My brain completely shut down. The only words that came out were, stretching. The trainer gave me a pitying look, but my boyfriend jumped in to save me. "She's being modest," he said, patting my back. "She's more into endurance stuff like running." Now, for some reason, I nodded, as if I've ever voluntarily run a mile in my entire life. And just like that, I was signed up for a CrossFit class. That first class was one of the worst experiences of my life. They made us flip tires and do pull-ups, or in my case, attempt pull-ups while dangling helplessly like a fish on a hook. By the end, I was lying on the floor, gasping for air, wondering if this was how I'd die. Meanwhile, my boyfriend was doing burpees like some kind of fitness robot, grinning from ear to ear. "You did amazing," he said after the class, kissing my sweaty forehead. I wanted to tell him that I'd pulled a muscle in my soul. But instead, I smiled and said, "That was fun." And so, the charade continued. He started inviting me to more workouts, trail runs, spin classes, HIIT sessions. Every time, I'd force myself through it, smiling through the pain, pretending I wasn't one misstep away from a full mental breakdown. One time, I tried to fake an injury, but he just said, "No worries, babe. We can focus on upper body today." The worst part? I've gotten a little stronger. I mean, I still hate every second of it, but I can lift a small dumbbell without collapsing now. My boyfriend keeps talking about how proud he is of my progress, and I can't bring myself to tell him the truth. My only real progress has been learning how to cry silently during a spin class. And now, because life hates me, he signed us up for a couple's obstacle course. It's one of those mud races where you climb walls, crawl under barbed wire, and run through freezing water. "It's going to be so fun," he said, eyes sparkling with excitement. "We'll crush it together. I am so great." I've considered every possible excuse to get out of it. Fake a sprained ankle? Claim I have a rare condition where mud gives me hives? Tell him I suddenly remembered I'm allergic to obstacles? But every time I try to back out, he gets this big, hopeful grin on his face, and I just can't do it. So now I'm Googling things like how to survive an obstacle course if you're deeply unfit, and can love protect you from hypothermia? I even bought a pair of running shoes that I have no idea how to break in because they still smell suspiciously like new rubber. I know I need to come clean. I can't keep pretending to love something I hate, especially not when it involves crawling through mud and risking tetanus. But how do you admit that the shared hobby you've been building your relationship around is a complete lie? I imagine sitting him down, taking his hand, and saying, "Babe, I love you, but I hate working out. Every squat, every sprint, every burpee, it's all been a performance." And then I picture the look on his face, and my heart breaks a little. The truth is, I've kept up the act because I love him. I love how passionate he is about fitness, even if it makes me want to collapse. I love the way he encourages me, cheering me on even when I'm clearly struggling. And I love the way his eyes light up every time we cross a finish line together, even if I'm crawling across it while he jogs. So, I've decided I'm going to tell him right after the obstacle course. One last hurrah. I'll survive the mud, the walls, the freezing water, and then I'll confess everything. Maybe we'll laugh about it, and maybe we'll find new things to bond over that don't involve barbells or burpees. Or maybe, just maybe, I'll realize I've been stronger than I thought all along. And if not, well, at least I'll have earned a very large, very unhealthy pizza afterward. It was supposed to be a simple science project. That's how it started, at least. Mr. Thompson, our physics teacher, told us we could pick any experiment for our final project as long as it involved practical applications of force and motion. Easy enough, right? Most groups chose safe, reasonable experiments, like dropping eggs from the roof or building mousetrap-powered cars. But Jake, because of course it's always Jake, had other plans. "We're not dropping eggs," he announced as soon as the project was assigned. "We're building a rocket." Dave groaned. "Why do you always do this?" "Because," Jake said, throwing an arm around Dave's shoulder, "you don't win the science fair with mousetrap cars, Dave. You win it with glory." I raised an eyebrow. "Do we even know how to build a rocket?" "No," Jake said cheerfully. "But how hard can it be?" And just like that, we were committed to the dumbest project of our academic careers. Jake's plan was simple. Too simple. We would build a rocket from scratch, load it with a bunch of homemade fuel, and launch it in the parking lot behind the football field. In Jake's mind, it was going to be a triumph of engineering. In reality, it was going to be a complete disaster. The first problem was the fuel. None of us had any idea what rockets were actually powered by. Dave suggested gasoline, which Jake called a weak move. Instead, he decided that we'd use gunpowder. Where are we supposed to get gunpowder? I asked, hoping, praying, that Jake didn't have an answer. But Jake just grinned. Don't worry about it. I know a guy. This, by the way, is never a sentence you want to hear from Jake. A few days later, Jake showed up at my house with a metal tube, a bunch of duct tape, and what I swear looked like a bucket of illegal fireworks. Say hello to the Nebula Mark I, Jake said, patting the metal tube like it was a Ferrari. This baby's going to the stars. Dave inspected the tube and frowned. It's literally just a pipe. Not just a pipe, Jake corrected. A rocket. There's a difference. There was no difference. The morning of the launch, we met up in Brian's backyard because, naturally, Van Brian was involved. We loaded the rocket into his van, along with the homemade fuel, which Jake stored in an old Gatorade bottle. That should have been our second red flag, but by that point, we were in too deep to back out. We just need to get it off the ground, Jake said, tightening the duct tape around the rocket. If it goes up even 10 feet, that's a win. Brian sipped his Mountain Dew and nodded. This is going to end horribly, he said, with more enthusiasm than concern. We drove to the football field at 6 a.m. before anyone else was awake. The plan was simple. Set up the rocket, ignite the fuel, and blast it into the stratosphere. Jake set the tube on an old folding chair to serve as our launch platform. I'm basically a NASA engineer, Jake whispered, admiring his handiwork. NASA is going to sue us, Dave muttered under his breath. Jake ignored him and handed me the lighter. You, my friend, get the honor of launching the Nebula Mark I. I stared at the Gatorade bottle full of suspicious black powder. Are we absolutely sure this isn't going to blow up? Nope, Jake said, smiling. Light her up. Against all common sense, I flicked the lighter and touched it to the fuse. For one heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then everything happened. The rocket ignited with a deafening boom, launching off the chair with the force of a grenade. Except it didn't go straight up. It veered sideways like a drunken missile, shooting across the football field at roughly the speed of sound. Oh shit, Dave yelled, diving for cover behind a trash can. The rocket flew straight into the school's sprinkler system, taking out 3 pipes and sending a geyser of water shooting into the air. It ricocheted off a metal goalpost, did a full 360-degree spin in the air, and then crashed into the bleachers with an explosive whomp that could probably be heard from space. And then, silence. For a moment, none of us moved. We just stared at the wreckage, too stunned to speak. Water sprayed everywhere from the broken sprinklers, soaking the entire field. Smoke drifted lazily from the twisted remains of the rocket, which had somehow lodged itself inside the bottom row of the bleachers. Jake, covered in soot and looking like a cartoon villain who just survived an explosion, slowly stood up and dusted off his hands. I'd say that was a successful launch. Just as we were starting to process what had happened, we heard the distant wail of sirens. Cops, Brian muttered, still remarkably calm for someone who had just witnessed the world's dumbest rocket failure. Run! Jake shouted, grabbing the remaining Gatorade bottle of fuel. We bolted for the van, slipping on the wet grass as we scrambled inside. Brian floored it, tires screeching as we fishtailed out of the parking lot. Behind us, water still gushed from the ruined sprinklers, and smoke from the rocket hung in the air like a victory banner. We didn't make it far. The cops caught us 2 blocks away, their cruiser lights flashing in the rearview mirror. They pulled us over, and the officer walked up to Brian's window, looking both annoyed and deeply confused. Mind explaining, the cop asked, why we found half a rocket stuck in the school bleachers. Jake, still grinning like an idiot, leaned forward. Science project officer, you wouldn't understand. We were taken to the station and held there until our parents showed up. Mr. Thompson, our science teacher, was called to explain why his students had tried to launch a weapon of mass destruction on school property. He was not amused. We got 2 weeks of detention, were banned from using any school equipment for the rest of the year, and our rocket project got an F. Though, personally, I think we deserved extra credit for creativity. Jake, of course, was unfazed. We went bigger than anyone else, he said proudly. That's what matters. To this day, people still talk about the rocket incident. The football field was under repair for a month, and every time it rained, water would randomly shoot out of the bleachers thanks to the busted sprinkler system. And Jake? He still insists it was the best science project the school had ever seen. And honestly, he's not wrong.